afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is a statement by John Swinney on the draft budget 2013-14. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should be therefore no interventions or interruptions. Cabinet Secretary, you've got 20 minutes.
Presiding Officer, the draft budget for 2013-14 that I outlined today maintains the course set out in Spending Review 2011 and continues our track record of effective stewardship of Scotland's public finances. I look forward to Parliament's scrutiny of our budget proposals ahead of the budget bill in the new year, and I will work with other parties to build as much consensus as I can around the Government's spending plans. As Parliament is aware, Scotland continues to face significant challenges as a result of global economic conditions and the UK Government's approach to the public finances. The settlement we received in the UK Spending Review is the toughest since devolution. Over a 4-year period between 2010-11 and 2014-15, the Scottish Government budget has been cut by more than 11% in real terms, and within that our capital budget has been reduced by a third. The position in 2013-14 is particularly challenging, with a cash terms decrease in the total DEL budget compared to the previous year. It represents the 4th consecutive year for which there has been a real terms reduction imposed on the Scottish Government's DEL budget. In June 2010, when the Office for Budget Responsibility set out their initial forecast for the UK economy, they predicted growth of 2.8% in 2012. Contrast that with the IMF's most recent forecast for growth of just 0.2% in 2012 and the latest OECD forecast for a decline of 0.7%. UK GDP has now contracted for 3 consecutive quarters, with a total decline of 1.2%. The decline has been driven by a sharp fall in the construction sector, which has fallen by 8.7% over this period. This data reinforces the case the Scottish Government continues to make that a different strategy is required from the UK Government. When economic conditions remain fragile, shovel-ready capital investment can provide an immediate short-term stimulus, in particular to the construction sector, as well as providing a range of long-term benefits to the people of Scotland from better housing, schools and hospitals. That is why yesterday we and the other devolved administrations called upon the UK Government to consider again the case for a targeted fiscal stimulus now that can support infrastructure investment and create the jobs our country needs. Global economic conditions continue to impact on economic confidence. Business investment remains considerably below pre-recession levels, whilst household incomes remain under pressure. We are therefore focused on enhancing confidence in order to encourage private sector investment and growth and to help thousands where we can. While the UK Government refuses to change course, this administration will continue to do all we can within our powers to deliver growth and support jobs. Over the past 12 months, we have acted decisively to achieve this. Last September, we published the Government's economic strategy and a spending review that set out substantial investment in infrastructure and measures to tackle unemployment. In the face of cuts being made to our capital budgets, we are boosting conventional capital investment through the £2.5 billion pipeline of infrastructure projects that will be delivered through the non-profit distributed model, switching over £700 million from resource budgets to support capital spending, and we are supporting a range of innovative finance initiatives such as the National Housing Trust. Overall, our major investment programmes support thousands of jobs across Scotland. From many examples, here are 2 compelling cases that reinforce the strength of this administration's approach. Firstly, 95% of our annual transport budget of nearly £2 billion was last year invested back into the private sector, supporting over 25% of civil engineering contracts in Scotland and more than 12,000 jobs. And secondly, it is estimated that our housing budget of more than £750 million over 3 years will generate around £3 billion of economic activity and support up to 8,000 jobs each year. The spending review also provided significant investment in skills and post-16 education, including through our Opportunities for All initiative, guaranteeing a training opportunity for any young person between 16 and 19 who is not in education, employment or training. It provided for a record 25,000 modern apprenticeship opportunities, all linked to real jobs. Completion rates have increased to a record 75%, and we now have nearly 55% of our 16 to 24-year-olds employed, compared to a UK average of 51%. and in total, from 2007 until the end of this spending review period, we will have invested almost £5 billion in colleges, 45% more in cash terms than the investment made under the 2 terms of the previous administration. The spending review confirmed decisive support for business, including boosting internationalisation of activity with great success in food and drink exports, use of the Scottish Investment Bank, the establishment of enterprise areas, and the most generous package of business rates reliefs in the UK, valued at more than £2 billion over 5 years, with the Small Business Bonus Scheme providing support to over 85,000 business properties. And at a time when household budgets and public services are under pressure, the spending review provided funding to deliver key commitments we have made to the people of Scotland, working with our local government partners to uphold the council tax freeze, supporting Scottish students into higher education through a policy of no tuition fees, free prescriptions, support for concessionary bus travel, ensuring a Scottish living wage for employees covered by our pay policy, protection for the NHS budget, improving the quality of our schools through curriculum for excellence, maintaining teacher numbers in line with pupil numbers, and provision for 1,000 additional police officers. I confirm to Parliament today that our draft budget will ensure the delivery of all of these commitments in 2013-14. This is a government that delivers on its promises. The spending review also put public service reform at the heart of this government's approach to the public finances and the economy. Our programme of reform is helping ensure that public resources are used to best effect in meeting the needs of the people of Scotland. In particular, we made clear that a decisive shift to preventative spending is essential to improving outcomes and ensuring the long-term financial sustainability of our public services. In partnership with local government, we have made more than £500 million available to 3 change funds to support early years, adult social care and to tackle reoffending. The draft budget announced today provides an update on these funds, illustrating the progress that can be made in driving change across mainstream service delivery. Looking forward, I confirm today that single outcome agreements will incorporate a long-term prevention plan that makes the commitment to increase the resource invested and reinvested over time in preventative interventions. This budget also confirms that we are on track to deliver our ambitious programme of police and fire reform and reflects agreements with local authority partners about the transfer of funding for these services. Presiding Officer, we set out in the spending review an approach that supports economic recovery. We continue to believe that approach is right for Scotland. However, we must remain vigilant to changing economic conditions and respond decisively. In developing the draft budget, I have scrutinised in detail what scope exists to create additional financial flexibility across the government's responsibilities to provide further stimulus. I have reached the following conclusions. Scottish Water has delivered significant improvements to services over the last 10 years. With an annual turnover in excess of £1.1 billion, it employs some 3,500 staff and sustains 20% of the Scottish civil construction industry. After 4 years of water charges being frozen in Scotland, average household charges are now £52 lower than the average in England and Wales, and a significant capital investment programme has been sustained to improve the quality of water services in Scotland. Against this background of high performance and efficiency, I have reconsidered Scottish Water's financial position and have agreed with the enterprise that we can reduce our lending by £45 million in 2013-14, with no detriment either to services or their investment programme. Furthermore, Business Stream have confirmed that they will be in a position to repay the loan made to them in 2008, which allows me to redeploy resources of £28 million over the next 2 years. These steps demonstrate beyond doubt the value of retaining Scottish Water in public ownership. I have also reviewed the benefits of our robust approach to the management of major infrastructure projects, such as the Forth Replacement Crossing. Due to the good progress that has been made, I am able to release budget contingency on the project this year of £20 million. I have also taken into account the efficiencies that the Scottish Futures Trust is helping us deliver in our overall capital programme. Over the past 3 years, SFT has delivered a total of £371 million in savings and benefits to the people of Scotland, and we expect further efficiencies in future, including in the school building programme. Furthermore, as a result of general efficiencies in our spending last year, I am able to carry forward more than originally planned through the budget exchange mechanism, freeing up nearly £40 million of additional resources to be deployed in 2012-13. There is also specific programme expenditure available to the Scottish Government through the Green Deal and housing loans amounting to around £31 million for deployment this year and next. I have, with the support from all government portfolios, considered the scope for redirecting resources within existing budgets, within the tight financial parameters that apply. Finally, I have considered our position on non-domestic rates. The Government has introduced several proportionate measures that will generate valuable income, including the Public Health Supplement. We continue to keep the income projections in the draft budget 2013-14 under review. In last year's spending review, we put in place a package of measures to help regenerate town centres and encourage empty properties back into use. As part of this, we believe the changes we are making to empty property relief have a key role to play. In listening to business, I recognise that there is more that we can do. So, to further incentivise empty properties back into use, the Local Government Minister yesterday lodged an amendment to the Unoccupied Properties Bill that, if passed by Parliament, will be used to reward those who bring premises back into use with some discounts on their rates bills. I also confirmed to Parliament that we are progressing the implementation of the additional powers set out in the Scotland Act, with an additional £3.5 million allocated in this budget to meeting implementation costs in 2013-14. By exploring all avenues, the steps I have taken enable me to make a number of further spending announcements today, which will support our immediate priorities of boosting capital investment, taking direct action to tackle unemployment, particularly amongst young people, and continuing to enhance economic confidence by encouraging private sector investment. In February this year, we announced a package of £380 million of capital spending over the period to 2014-15, focusing on transport, housing, digital and maintenance projects. And in June, we announced a package of investment in shovel-ready projects valued at £105 million in 2012-13, targeted towards renewables, housing and transport. The second year of the package will include substantial further investment in renewables, road improvements, regeneration, culture and tourism projects. I now confirm today that we will provide an immediate stimulus to the construction industry, with further capital investment in affordable housing of more than £40 million over this autumn and next year.
One moment, Cabinet Secretary. I'd be grateful if you could save the applause till the end.
By providing substantial capital investment in housing and delivering more homes more efficiently than was ever achieved under the previous administration, 6,882 new affordable homes were delivered last year, demonstrating that this government is on track to build the homes that our people require. To further boost the construction industry, we are also able to expand the number of schools being built through Scotland's Schools for the Future programme. We will increase the number of schools being built from 55 to 67, and we will build them sooner. The Education Secretary will confirm the detail of these plans shortly, but I am able to tell Parliament that I have authorised the financing of more rapid delivery of the programme by bringing forward £80 million of planned investment from future years into this spending review period through the NPD model. This will further increase the total number of schools being delivered by this administration. 358 schools have already been built or refurbished in the last 4 financial years, more than the previous administration was able to deliver in 8 years, and we have half the number of children in crumbling schools. More generally, our partnership with Scotland's local authorities remains central to this government's delivery programme, and local government's capital investment programme has a key role to play. I know that Parliament will welcome the joint commitment the First Minister and the President of COSLA have made today to work together wherever possible to increase or accelerate capital investment to support economic recovery. This government has long argued that investment in the green economy can deliver multiple economic and environmental benefits. In today's budget, I am announcing a total of £30 million of funding over this year and next for a programme of energy efficiency measures that will tackle fuel poverty, contribute to meeting our climate change targets and provide opportunities for small and medium-sized construction firms. The package will focus on supporting domestic households to improve home insulation along with measures to increase energy efficiency in the public sector. We are also continuing our course of additional investment in sustainable and active travel by providing further funding of £2.5 million next year for hybrid buses. Presiding Officer, despite the economic challenges that we face, the Government remains focused on the opportunities for growth and encouraging the development of Scotland's growth sectors. For example, we have seen recent success in tourism, a sector which contributed £2.9 billion to gross value added in 2010, with a 5% increase in visitor numbers over the year to March 2012. With this in mind, I announced today fresh investment of £1.5 million in high-yield marketing to be carried out by Visit Scotland this financial year. Our cultural assets are also a huge strength. This is epitomised by the wonderful success of the National Museum of Scotland, for example, which has attracted over 2 million visitors since it reopened. I am pleased, therefore, to announce additional investment next year of £1 million in the maintenance of historic buildings across Scotland. The forthcoming Commonwealth Games also present a vital opportunity to strengthen our global profile while bringing health and other benefits closer to home through their potential impact on participation in sport and the well-being of our people. Building on the momentum provided by the Olympics, the Paralympics and the promise of the Commonwealth Games, and recognising the impact that sporting success can have, I have allocated an additional £1 million next year to support Scotland's elite athletes in the run-up to the Commonwealth Games. And we are committing an additional £6 million across this year and next to deliver further improvements to Scotland's cycling infrastructure, focusing on our Community Links initiative. As well as supporting our health and well-being agenda, our investment in cycling adds further strength to our efforts to tackle climate change, which will also be enhanced by new funds for peatland restoration, and I am pleased to publish alongside this budget the latest carbon assessment of our spending plans. I also published today the Government's Equality Budget Statement, which highlights the negative impact of the UK Government's welfare reform agenda, an approach that runs contrary to our determination to create a fairer Scotland. We are responding as best we can with our local authority partners and within our legislative competence to mitigate these threats. This budget confirms additional resources of £23 million next year to mitigate the cut to council tax benefit from the UK Government, and we will continue to engage with the Department of Work and Pensions about the successor arrangements for the Social Fund. Nowhere is the case for independence made more clearly than in the contrasting approaches and ideologies of this Government and its counterparts in Westminster in the area of welfare reform. Scotland is a country that more than pays its way in the world, and we will continue to take a distinctive course that prizes effective use of public money, but also reflects our core value that we must support the most vulnerable in our society. Over the last 3 years, our policy of pay restraint has helped to support thousands of public sector jobs, while the Scottish Living Wage and our pay awards have protected the incomes of those who earn the least. And by continuing to implement core economic and social commitments through our social wage, including the abolition of prescription charges, free higher education and personal care, and the freezing the council tax, we have sought to help households across Scotland. I am now publishing today, alongside the budget, our pay policy for 2013-14. Last year I said I would seek to ease pay restraint. Following a 2-year freeze in basic pay, I am able to announce a modest increase for most employees. The policy caps increases in total costs of basic pay awards at 1% in 2013-14, but with priority for those earning less than £21,000 to ensure that they receive increases of more than this, and the retention of the freeze in basic award for those earning more than £80,000 a year. Our policy also includes a commitment to continue to implement the Scottish Living Wage, not just in 2013-14, but over the remainder of this Parliament. Finally, we renew today our commitment to a no compulsory redundancy policy, providing certainty for public sector staff. These measures will help enhance economic confidence, provide security to thousands of workers, and support jobs and activity across the economy. Presiding Officer, a vital part of our efforts to create a fairer society must be the support we provide to our young people, particularly in the current economic climate. Although the latest figures show a welcome rise in Scotland's youth employment rate of 1 percentage point, youth unemployment remains far too high at 24.3%. In developing today's budget, I have been determined to do more to support those looking and training for work. First, to support our commitments to keep student numbers at 2011-12 levels and provide the necessary student support, I announce today further funding of £17 million for college education. Second, I am announcing today that I will allocate resources to establish an Energy Skills Academy to support the development of skills for a diverse Scottish energy economy in oil and gas, renewables, thermal generation, carbon capture and storage industries. Third, although we have taken a number of steps to support young people, we must create more opportunities for them to secure jobs. One of the key groups that require assistance are 18 to 24-year-olds who have been unemployed for 3 to 9 months. We will put in place an initiative supported by £15 million of government funds and matched by European structural funds and employer contributions. The initiative will work across Scotland and will be focused on the small and medium-sized enterprises in the private sector. As a consequence of this cooperative approach, the Government will assist in the creation of up to 10,000 jobs for young people in the private sector. These measures confirm our absolute determination to do all that we can to support the young people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, the Government has today published a draft budget which honours the commitments it has made to the people of Scotland and within tight parameters provides for additional measures to support economic recovery. I have today announced investment in infrastructure, the green economy, skills and employability of around £250 million. In this budget, I confirm that this Government will do all that it can to focus its resources on driving forward Scotland's economy. I commend the budget to Parliament.
Order. Order. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 40 minutes for questions. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary if they would press the request to speak button now. And I call Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance stood up in this very Parliament and announced what he described as a budget for jobs and growth. He said he planned to steer Scotland in a distinct course. 1 year on, unemployment in Scotland is higher than the UK average, and our country has sunk back into recession for the second time under his stewardship. It is certainly distinct. In fact, the decisions taken by this SNP minister and this SNP administration have cost 30,000 public sector jobs over the last year alone. And yet the Finance Minister stands before us today with no hint of humility and no hint of apology. The worrying truth is that this Finance Minister seems content to pass the buck, to either blame Westminster for all our woes or to pass responsibility for all his cuts to our local authorities. Mr Swinney talks of partnership with our councils in his statement. What he didn't mention was that they will have to bear the brunt of his cuts. In fact, Mr Swinney didn't even have the courage to mention it. He has transferred across the police and fire budget, but can I ask him to clarify what is the real terms cut to our local authorities? How many care workers, how many nursery assistants, how many bin men are going to lose their jobs? How many older people are going to struggle for support? How many kids' schools will suffer? How do his decisions in any way ameliorate or mitigate the welfare cuts inflicted from the UK government? The Cabinet Secretary is right on this, though. Scotland's young people are being harshly affected by his recession. So why did the Finance Minister slam the college door shut in their faces with last year's cuts to further education? The £17 million announced this year does not come close to putting that right. Can I ask the Finance Minister this? Was he right then and therefore wrong now, or is he right now and therefore wrong then? Because it can't be both. One of the few scraps of good news in this budget is some help for the housing sector. But given the cuts last year, again, he's not even undoing the damage he has wrought on this industry. 12,000 builders lost their jobs last year due to his decisions. Can I ask the Secretary if he'll take the leaf out of the Welsh Government's book? Use government revenue to pay off interest on housing association and council debt, freeing up capital. Presiding Officer, what we have heard yet again from this Finance Minister, the droopy mantra, it wasn't me. If the Scottish people know better, it is him. When will he stop passing the buck, take responsibility for his own actions and get Scotland working again?
Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary.
Mr McIntosh asked about the situation on local authority funding. And what I can say to Mr McIntosh is that local government commands under my stewardship as Finance Minister in this government a larger share of the budget than I inherited from all of his Labour predecessors in Scotland. So that's the first myth debunked. Secondly, let's look at the housing situation. Between 2007 and 2011, this government invested £2.3 billion in housing in Scotland. Between April 2003 and March 2007, the previous Labour government invested £1.6 billion. And in the last year of the Labour government, they were able to build 4,832 houses. We were able to build in 2011-12 6,882 homes. So I will take no lectures about housing from a Labour Party that was so inefficient in house construction it couldn't build the houses. It needed the SNP to come in and build the houses for the people of our country. And in terms of welfare cuts, I would remind Mr McIntosh that he's joined at the hip to the people who are cutting welfare in this country. Every one of them, all of them over there. And they're joined at the hip, handing out leaflets together in Eastwood with Mr McIntosh, cutting welfare and allowing the Tories and the Liberals to get away with it. Now, what are we doing about it? Well, what we're doing about it is that as a result of partnership working with local government, we're putting money in to make up for the cut in council tax benefit. Local government has contributed to that, finding solutions for the people of Scotland, not posturing with the Tories like Ken McIntosh. I will not take a scrap of a lesson from Ken McIntosh about facing up to my responsibilities. I've set a budget in this Parliament, a balanced budget since 2007, and that lot have voted against every decent measure that's ever been brought forward. So we'll face up to our responsibilities and we'll deliver for the people of Scotland.
Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for an advance copy of his statement and indeed the draft budget. I was particularly grateful for an advance copy of the draft budget because I found out at page 158, total Scottish Government budget just over £34 billion. The budget that Mr Swinney inherited in his first full year, £31.9 billion. More than £2 billion more at his disposal than he had when he arrived at office, yet he complains about savage cuts. At best, this could be described as an artful budget, Presiding Officer. And let's look at the central theme of the economy. Housing, for example, Mr Swinney takes out £100 million. That wasn't a promise from the manifesto. He takes out £100 million and he thinks they should be grateful because today he's giving £40 million back. At a time when the construction sector is really struggling. At a time when we have high youth unemployment, he takes £50 million out the college sector, and today they should be grateful because they're getting £17 million back. We see reductions over the course in the enterprise agencies, reductions over the course of a spending review for innovation, an enormous hit for rail infrastructure, and business taxes that weren't promised in his manifesto in terms of the retail levy and in terms of empty property rates. Presiding Officer, when you add those together, how on earth does he justify his pre-budget statements about putting every single penny he can into the economy and saying that he has an unrelenting pursuit for economic growth? The press relief and the narrative simply don't match.
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Mr Brown for his question, and can I start with the numbers? Because Mr Brown and I always love to start with the numbers. And if Mr Brown looks at page 2 of the budget document, so not away at page 158, but page 2, right up there, setting out all the details, I chart out the information about the UK Government's spending review settlement. I set out honestly and openly the consequentials that we've had from the UK Government, and what it shows is that the total DEL budget in 2012-13 was £28.6 million, and it's now to £28.44 billion. Now that's a reduction, a cut in cash terms. So now, if Mr Brown would care to look in detail at all of the numbers, which I'm sure he will do, he will recognise that the Conservative government in the United Kingdom, and he talked about what I've done with the housing budget, I've had to deal with the fact that the United Kingdom government has reduced our budget for capital purposes by 33%. Yep. 1/3. Yep. Now that is the irresponsible act that we have had to deal with. A 33% reduction in the capital budget of the Scottish Government in the teeth of an economic recession. Now, if Mr Brown listened carefully to the arguments that I marshal on this whole issue and the arguments that we marshal to the UK Government, we marshal an argument which is about investment in the long-term future of the economy, which is capital investment. It is a responsible thing to do. It's something I would have thought the Conservative Government would have been attracted to, and recognising the severity of the economic circumstances. Because what Mr Brown has to acknowledge is that when his government came to power, the forecast for growth in the economy today was 2.8%, and now it ranges between -0.7% and 0.2%. That is the rationale for investing in capital projects within this country. Now, Mr Brown asks me, what have I done to support the economy? Well, there's £2.5 billion of NPD capital expenditure that's been brought forward. There's more schools that we've just announced that Mr Russell will comment about in the course of the next few days. There's an immediate stimulus to the housing sector. There's an initiative to support the employment of young people in the private sector. There's all the modern apprenticeships, which, if my memory serves me right, the Conservatives voted against. There was also the small business bonus scheme, which, of course, the Conservatives voted against last year in an act of real folly. Oh, well, Mr Brown says, come on, come on. Well, I'm afraid these are the facts. The Conservatives voted against the budget last year. They voted against the small business bonus scheme. It must have been... the First Minister says, bring back Annabel Goldie. It must have been a sensible leadership that was taking the decisions in the last Parliament, and they've lost their way in this Parliament. So I do hope that Mr Brown, in examining the detail of the budget, will acknowledge the government is using I'm doing exactly what Mr Brown demands of me, that I use every lever at my disposal to invest in the economy, and that is exactly what I've done this afternoon.
I'd like to thank the Finance Secretary for an advance copy of his statement, and also the offer of talks yesterday. He knows that last year the Liberal Democrats worked constructively to deliver changes to the budget, and we secured extra funds for colleges, social housing and early intervention. This year I hope we can work together again to protect those gains, and in a budget that's £34 billion, as Gavin Brown says, which is increased in cash terms no matter what he says about DEL budgets. Mr Swinney said this morning that he wanted, and in quotes, a relentless pursuit of economic growth. But this is a timid budget, proposed by a government more focused on independence than economic growth. If he was really committed to doing all he can, he would make the necessary reforms to release £1.5 billion locked up in the accounts of Scottish Water to invest in creating 100,000 new jobs in broadband, science, early intervention and energy efficiency. That's the kind of change that prioritises the economy. So will he make those reforms to release the money to create the jobs, or will he just be timid?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr Rennie for his question, and I will, of course, as my letter to Mr Rennie, Mr Brown, Mr McIntosh, Mr Harvey and Mr MacDonald yesterday confirmed, engage in dialogue with all of the parties now that the Government has set out its proposals, and I will happily take forward those discussions. I would have thought that Mr Rennie might have welcomed the steps that I was taking to generate maximum impact from the Scottish Water enterprise within our country. That it has actually leveraged out resources to be used in the support of the economy, which previously we didn't think we'd be able to bring into the budget. So I would have thought Mr Rennie would have welcomed that in the budget. Now, he asked me once again to go through the routine of privatising Scottish Water, which I've told him on countless occasions that I won't be privatising Scottish Water. Not in any circumstances will I be doing that. But interestingly, when Mr Rennie's idea was put forward by the Liberal Democrats before the parliamentary election in 2011, the Scotsman newspaper reported on putting this proposal to the decision-maker on this question, to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander. And this is what the Scotsman reported. Mr Alexander failed to promise that the £1.5 billion the party, that's the Liberal Democrats, claims would be freed up by the sell-off would not be clawed back by the Treasury from the UK Government's block grant. So it's a kind of strange situation where you sell the family silver and you don't even get to keep the proceeds as a result. So, if Mr Rennie will forgive me, I don't think I'll take that approach, but what I will do is carefully ensure that the public finances of Scotland are marshalled in an effective way to support economic growth, and I look forward to any suggestions he may have as to how that may be enhanced in the weeks to come.
Many members have asked to question the Cabinet Secretary, so could I ask that the questions are as brief as possible, and in that way, hopefully, we can get everybody in. Kenny Gibson to be followed by Richard Baker.
Presiding Officer, I warmly welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. Once again, he has produced a measured, innovative and positive budget for Scotland in very challenging economic circumstances. He mentioned the need to focus capital investment in shovel-ready projects. Can he further elaborate on how he will accelerate capital projects and what they will deliver for Scotland in terms of employment, improved connectivity and growth? And will he tell the Chamber how much more he could achieve for Scotland and its people had this Parliament the economic powers of an independent sovereign nation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I set out in my statement a number of steps that I've taken in January, first of all in the spending review last September, in January, in June and then again today, to support projects that have been taken forward in all of the areas that, to which Mr Gibson refers. Clearly, the impact of capital spending is felt acutely within the economy. It boosts the construction sector. I was interested very much in the comments of Ken Gillespie of Morrison Construction, who said the other day that construction feels we have a stronger market in Scotland than we have elsewhere in the United Kingdom, which I think demonstrates that this Government has attached the priority necessary for capital expenditure and is creating the jobs as a consequence. On Mr Gibson's final point, I am constrained to operate within the resources that are set for me by the United Kingdom Treasury. I hope I have demonstrated this afternoon that the Government is inventive about how we can try to release more resources to impact on the economy within Scotland. But if we had the full powers of an independent country, we could achieve a great deal more for the people of our country.
Richard Baker to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary talked of the importance of switching £700 million from revenue to capital. Where then is the logic of the Scottish Government's decision to cut £350 million of investment from a vital rail infrastructure project, the Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme, investment from Network Rail's borrowing capability, which trade unions and business organisations have made clear would also have boosted jobs and the economy. That was a shovel-ready project. Why isn't that one going?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's somewhat familiar for Mr Baker to look always at for any negative line of argument to put forward. Mr Baker and his colleagues rather ignored the very significant investment that Mr Brown was talking about yesterday in Parliament, £650 million being deployed in the Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme. Where's the welcome from the Labour Party for that particular shovel-ready project?
Maureen Watt to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Officer, can I welcome the resources allocated to the Energy Skills Academy, which will benefit all learning institutions in the North East and beyond? Can the Cabinet Secretary detail the overall funding packages to colleges in light of his commitments today?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I can say to Maureen Watt is that the Government's commitments on college numbers will be entirely fulfilled. We have put in place increased resources for student support. This will be taken forward as part of the overall agenda of ensuring that every young person between the age of 16 and 19 has access to an education or training opportunity if they cannot find one or they cannot find employment for themselves. And it gives a very secure foundation to the long-term future of the college sector in Scotland, in addition, of course, to the very significant investment that the Government has made in the higher education sector, which gives the higher education centre a certainty of funding that is not prevalent for higher education institutions south of the border.
Rhoda Grant, to be followed by Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome the Energy Skills Academy, and I hope it will build on the very good success rate of North Highland College and the NIG Skills Academy. However, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware there's also a shortage of graduate engineers. So can I ask if he will now remove the cap on those university places for engineers? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think what I would hope, I thought we were getting somewhere with Rhoda Grant, that we were going to go on to territory that was slightly more positive about what was being said, but there always has to be a negative about what's involved. The Government's commitment to the Energy Skills Academy is just one further illustration of how we are drawing together the work of all of the higher education and further education institutions around the country in a combined effort to make sure that Scotland can reap the rewards of the renewable energy opportunities that are clearly coming to Scotland, and also reap the rewards of the significant opportunities that exist within the oil and gas sector into the bargain. By working together, by ensuring that we have cooperation amongst all of these higher and further education institutions, working with the Energy Skills Academy, we can deliver the skills that are required for these key sectors, and the resources that I have announced today will fulfil that commitment to the people of Scotland.
Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Mary Scanlon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given the comments the Cabinet Secretary referred to earlier from Ken Gillespie of the Morrison Group in regard to the stronger construction market in Scotland, does he believe his announcement today will reinforce such a view, and in doing so encourage the UK Government to follow the Scottish Government's plan of action designed to meet the needs of the Scottish economy and the Scottish people?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mr Crawford will be familiar with the fact that the Government has pursued on a relentless basis the importance of capital investment in the economy. And we faced a choice in 2011 as we prepared the spending review, that we could have followed the line of argument of the Conservatives and we could have just accepted our 33% reduction in our capital budget. Alternatively, we could have created the type of mechanisms and initiatives through the non-profit distributed model which has enabled us to maintain the capital programme and enabled Mr Neil, for example, to announce yesterday the development of works at the Edinburgh Sick Kids Hospital and the other developments that have taken place under the auspices of SFT. That is why we have a stronger market in Scotland for construction projects, because we have given the continuity to the marketplace, and what the Conservatives have done have damaged that opportunity, and of course the Labour Party have opposed us every step of the way as we've tried to build that capital programme. So I do hope, and the First Minister was making this point yesterday at the Joint Ministerial Committee in London, that the UK Government should change course and provide the necessary investment to support a capital programme that can encourage the development of the Scottish economy and create the type of marketplace that Mr Gillespie was talking about in his interview yesterday.
Mary Scanlon, followed by Colin Beattie.
Thank you. Given that economic growth depends on a healthy and skilled workforce, will the Finance Secretary ensure that more of the preventative spend measures are allocated to mental health, with current waiting times of 40, 50 and 60 weeks for therapy and psychological support for children and adults?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mary Scanlon makes a very fair point about the importance of mental health. It is, of course, an issue that she has championed in this Parliament since 1999, and the Health Secretary will have heard exactly the point that Ms Scanlon has made today, and I'm sure will reflect very carefully on that in terms of the direction that is given to health boards and to other elements of the health budget. I should point out, of course, that the Government has fulfilled its commitment to pass on to the Health Service the Barnett consequentials that we said we would do in the election in 2011, and Mr Neil will have heard Ms Scanlon's points, and I'm sure we'll be happy to discuss them with her.
Colin Beattie, to be followed by Kezia Dugdale.
Does the Cabinet Secretary intend to continue the living wage for the duration of this spending review and uprate it in line with the Living Wage Campaign recommendations?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can confirm to Mr Beattie that the Government will maintain its commitment to the living wage, and we will uprate it at when the appropriate detail is to hand. I would expect that probably to be in November, and I will, of course, report to Parliament at that time.
Kezia Dugdale, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since Labour have long called for a job creation scheme for young people, I welcome the commitment to 10,000 jobs for young people today. Could the Cabinet Secretary clarify the match funding arrangements for the announcement he made? Will it lead to £30 million of investment in 2013 or 14? That wasn't clear. And furthermore, can he define what he means by a job? Are we talking about full-time permanent posts here?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I say that I welcome Kezia Dugdale's remarks. It would have been nice if that had been perhaps reflected on the front bench, but I'll leave that for reflection. On her point about the match funding, there will be £15 million of government money. I would expect that to be matched by European Structural Fund money, and I expect the total pot to be in the order of £40 to £50 million that will be available for this initiative. In terms of what I define by a job, it is about creating private sector employment within the SMEs of this country, and we will work with the business community and with other providers to ensure that we fulfil those commitments.
Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain how the savings from Scottish Water will be made without any detriment to the capital investment programme?
Cabinet Secretary.
What I'd explain to Mr McMillan is that we have given very substantial capital funding to Scottish Water in recent years. We have agreed an investment programme which remains absolutely intact. The issue, of course, is that Scottish Water has become increasingly in recent years a very efficient organisation, as I recounted in the comments that I made in my statement, and also in the procurement of its capital programme. Needless to say, in a time of economic constraint, it is possible to receive more competitive prices for particular contracts, and as a consequence, it is possible for Scottish Water to achieve more with less money. So the investment programme can be delivered without the need for government investment, and there is greater priority to deploy those resources in other areas of public expenditure. And that's the type of approach that I take throughout the budget monitoring on an annual basis, to guarantee that the money we have allocated has been allocated in the most appropriate and effective way to guarantee the most effective outcome for the people of Scotland.
Patrick Harvey, to be followed by Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government has consistently refused to raise revenue and instead simply hands on the UK Government's cuts. And now the Cabinet Secretary hands on a 1% pay cap, which is exactly the position that George Osborne is taking south of the border. How much negotiation has he undertaken with public sector unions in Scotland before making the decision on that 1% cap? Will they agree it, and will they be comfortable with the position he's taking, money from revenue into capital, money which could be supporting the lowest paid public sector workers in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
as I look at Mr Brown and listen to Mr Harvey saying the government refuses to raise revenue, Mr Brown is frequently complaining when the government does try to raise revenue, like the public health supplement or the empty property tax relief. So it's just not the case that the government's not prepared to raise revenue. On the point in relation to public sector remuneration, I accept, and I think I've accepted consistently within Parliament, the difficulties that a period of pay restraint has for members of the public sector workforce. And what the government has done has been to attach the greatest priority to the preservation of public sector employment at a time when public spending is under pressure. That is therefore that's an issue I've discussed on countless occasions with the public sector trade unions. I saw the public sector trade unions before I formulated and agreed the pay policy with the Cabinet. I see the public sector trade unions on a regular basis during the year. I'm not, I can't. It would be wrong for me to say what their opinion is about the shift from revenue to capital. I think it would be for the trade unions themselves to make that point. But from my point of view, I have a duty to find ways in which we can try to deliver the economic opportunities that the people of our country require. And I think it is a sensible decision to shift resources from revenue into capital to try to create those opportunities. I'm very happy to discuss that point with the public sector trade unions. We discussed these and many other issues on a regular basis.
Elaine Murray, followed by Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. £40 million additional investment in housing is welcome. However, the affordable housing supply budget fell by £86 million between last year and this. The draft budget housing and regeneration line on page 116 is reducing in real terms, and the official housing statistics for Scotland show rented social housing starts falling from 6,099 in 2010-11 to 2,948 in 2011-12. How much of the £40 million will be made available for socially rented housing, and will the Scottish Government rethink the level of HAG subsidy made available to councils and RSLs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the last point that Dr Murray made is, I think, the most revealing point, because it gets to the heart of the point I was making to Mr McIntosh in my earlier answer. In the last year of the Labour Government, £562 million was spent and only 4,832 houses completed. In 2011-12, £352 million was spent by this government, a much smaller sum of money, I readily concede, but it built 6,882 houses, and Mr Neil points out higher quality houses. Now, my point is this, that what people are interested in, what our constituents are interested in, is whether or not the government can create the necessary incentives and mechanisms that will build the houses that people need to live in. And the Labour Party needs to move on and realise that we need to deliver effective value in the public expenditure that we have in Scotland today. And as a consequence, I think this government is delivering exactly what the people expected. Yeah. We said we would deliver 30,000 affordable homes during the lifetime of this Parliament. We are on course to deliver that commitment to the people of Scotland. The prediction was that it would require £610 million of expenditure to fulfil that commitment from the government, and we've actually allocated £760 million over a 3-year period. So I do think the Labour Party should just accept that what the government is delivering in its housing programme is greater and more effective value, and as a consequence constructing the houses that the people of Scotland need.
Kevin Stewart to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary has outlined new funding in relation to youth employment, which I'm sure will be welcomed by young people and SMEs in my constituency and across the country. Can he advise what all of this delivers and what the cumulative spending is, therefore, on providing opportunities for our young people?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the sum of money that will be involved in all of the opportunities for young people in Scotland will be in excess of £1.4 billion in terms of the combination of higher further education and some of the announcements that I've made today in relation to the programmes. There is a multiplicity of different interventions that we're putting forward, whether it's the 25,000 modern apprenticeships which were exceeded this year, whether it's the college places that we've put in place, or whether it's the new employer recruitment initiative that we've set out in the course of the budget. So I think Mr Stewart can be assured that the government is attaching the highest priority to creating the opportunities for young people in Scotland, and we will continue to do so.
Neil Findlay, to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
By reinstating some of the cash crudely hacked out of the college's budget, he has admitted that the policy direction has been wrong. When will he overrule the Education Secretary and reinstate the rest and give hope to the 10,000 young people on college waiting lists?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can say to Mr Findlay that the Education Secretary and I work very cooperatively on trying to find the best way forward for the college sector in Scotland. Mr Findlay has to accept, and I think the colleges of Scotland have accepted and embraced this whole approach, that there is a need for... They have. A need for reform in the way the colleges of Scotland operate, and we need to focus more on the needs of the individuals who are going through the learning experience. And what that means is that we are able to provide the opportunities for the people who are available and able to go to the colleges. Now, on the question of opportunities for young people between the ages of 16 and 19 have, for the first time ever under this government, got a guarantee that they will have an education or training opportunity if they cannot find that of their own free will. That is something I would have thought Mr Findlay might have accepted and acknowledged as a step forward for the young people of Scotland.
Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the key issue of the Health Service, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm how this government has continued its policy and how it's managed to continue its policy of protecting frontline NHS budgets?
Cabinet Secretary.
What is set out in the health budget arrangements is as I confirmed to members earlier, the passing on of Barnett consequentials to the health service. And within that, there has been greater priority given to the funding available to the territorial health boards within Scotland. And as a consequence of that, there is a strong funding settlement in the budget to support the delivery of activities by the health boards of Scotland within every community of our country.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Margaret MacDonald.
The RCN say that nursing levels are at their lowest point since 2005, with almost 2,500 nurses having been cut and patient care suffering. Today, the First Minister pledged his support for nurses. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell me how Table 3.02, which actually sets out a real terms reduction in the health budget, is consistent with the First Minister's view, and how many more nurses and other NHS staff will lose their jobs as a result?
Cabinet Secretary.
As the First Minister pointed out at question time earlier today, Scotland has more nurses per head of population than any other part of the United Kingdom. And after Jackie Bailey's contribution to the finance debates last year, where she managed to totally and utterly contort the amount of money, the proportion of our budget that was going into preventative expenditure to a quite ridiculous extent, I will take no lessons from Jackie Bailey about numbers.
Margaret MacDonald, to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank the Minister for prior sight of the statement and his billy-do of yesterday. I'll be at him later, though, to suggest some spending for very good community sports projects. What I want to ask him about is the inflation rate in the NHS. It's been consistently 2 to 3 times more than that of the RPI and CPI, thus eating deep into NHS cash. So isn't it time that the government told the PFI groups that we can no longer afford to keep them in paying them the extortionate rates that they're extracting from your budget, from his budget, I apologise. I would suggest calling them all in and telling them, especially the banks amongst them, that we're all in this together and that they will have their payments reduced as workers and benefit claimants are having their incomes reduced.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think it's a pretty good idea that Margaret MacDonald has put forward, and if she would care to join me for the encounter, it would be very welcome. One point I would make to Margaret MacDonald in all seriousness, as I think she knows, I have explored very carefully the nature of the contractual commitments that have been made under PFI schemes. And if I could unpick any of these schemes, I would unpick them. But they were so appallingly badly negotiated by my predecessors that that not only do, in many of these contracts do the owners of the PFI contracts have the exclusive right to determine whether there is even a negotiation I can't insist on a negotiation in some of these cases. Even if there is a negotiation and a change of financial arrangements, my predecessors negotiated the right for the owners of PFI contracts to retain some of the proceeds. So, I don't think my predecessors did a very good job of negotiating PFI contracts.
Finally, Neil Bibby, briefly please.
Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, if the SNP are so concerned about accelerating capital spend, why none of his SNP MP colleagues attended the infrastructure bill debate in the House of Commons on Monday? He also mentioned early years and children. Page 58 shows a £4 million cut to the children and families budget in the Scottish Government, not to mention budget pressures facing local authorities who provide children's services. So can he explain in more detail how he thinks this budget is good for Scotland's children?
First Minister. Secretary.
I think the budget is good for Scotland's children because what it does is it draws together the essential working on supporting children, particularly in the early years, as I set out last year about the Early Years Change Fund, and drawing together the work of local authorities, the health boards and other key partners in this process to make sure that children in their early years get the most effective, joined-up support that they can obtain within our country. So that's why the budget is good for children in Scotland, because what the Government has done is created a framework that brings all the key partners together to deliver the best options and the best solutions for the children of our country.
That ends the statement and questions on the budget. We now move to... We have a point of order. Patrick Hart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to raise a point of order under Rule 5.8 of our standing orders, which sets out that the Parliamentary Bureau shall ensure that sufficient time is set aside for consideration of draft budgets. As a member not represented on the Bureau, I wish to ask for your assurance on how that will be interpreted. In last year's report on the budget by the Finance Committee, it was agreed that there was a need to improve the presentation of the climate change aspects of the budget, and in particular the need for a read-across between relevant documents, between the Government's report on policies and proposals under the Climate Change Act and the draft budget. And I see from one of the budget documents published and provided to members just an hour ago that the Government agrees. It says this assessment needs to be read alongside analysis contained in the report on policies and proposals. Now, committees are currently being told to expect this document, the RPP, under the Climate Change Act, sometime in November. Will you ensure that when the Parliamentary Bureau sets aside sufficient time to consider the draft budget, that is understood as sufficient time to consider both documents together, as the Finance Committee has agreed is necessary and as the Government has also agreed is necessary?
I thank Patrick Harvey for giving me advance notice of his point of order. This has enabled me to give the matter careful consideration. Scrutiny of the Scottish Government's budget is a very important work of this Parliament. The process for the consideration of the draft budget is set out in standing orders. Business managers will, in due course, consider the timetable for the consideration of the draft budget under Rule 5.8. The requirement on the Scottish Government to lay a report in Parliament on climate change policies and proposals is set in the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. There is no requirement in this Act for the report to be published alongside the draft budget, though I accept the member is entitled to make a case for this to be so, and that he cites the views of the Finance Committee on this matter. I suggest that the member raises this point with the conveners of these two committees and any other relevant subject committee who may wish to make a case to the Scottish Government before the Bureau considers timetabling matters. We now move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on the motion number 4179 in the name of Duncan McNeill on the Health and Sport Committee's inquiry into support for community sport. Members who wish to take part in the debate should press the request to speak button now. And I will give a few seconds for the front benches to change.
And I move to the next item of business, which is debate on motion number 4179 in the name of Duncan McNeill on the Health and Sport Committee's inquiry into support for community sport. We're very tight for time in this debate, and I call on Duncan McNeill to speak to and move the motion with a tight 10 minutes.
Today we have deliberately moved the goalposts, Deputy Presiding Officer, but at least the playing field is level, and if you're lucky, even a state-of-the-art 3G. But I should go on to explain that this debate on grassroots sports comes not on the back of a published report, but midway through an inquiry by the Health and Sport Committee. It's not the first time a committee of this Parliament has sought wider input like this, as any of my education colleagues here would confirm. However, it's the first for the Health and Sport Committee, so I would like to provide a sense of the evidence that we've heard to date and then do that within the allotted time, I hope. The committee welcomes your views, I suppose is the message, be a backbencher, a minister, a member of the cross-party group on sport, and I'm confident that we will hear from the redoubtable convener of that group will have something to say to us sooner rather than later. Now, I don't know if you went along to salute our Olympic heroes in Glasgow or Edinburgh last weekend, or were one of the 15,000 plus who turned out to welcome Andy home. But that inspiration, that bounce, that energy, something we all want to continue in the build-up for Glasgow 2014. It was well described by a witness from Active Stirling when he told the committee about Andy Murray's tweeting of his 400-metre split time compared with Mo Farah's. It caused quite a stir, apparently, online. But it's not about someone trying to be a good gold medal tennis player or a 10,000-metre athlete, he said, but it is vital that we capture the motivation that the performance sport can give to physical activity. There was a mention of a double-strand pathway, which sounds highfalutin, but it just means focusing on both the elite side and ensuring that my granddaughter still wants to go swimming when she's a teenager. Our inquiry addresses three policy strands: the contribution of volunteers, the impact of sports clubs on their communities, and the importance of facilities, or if you prefer, people participation in places. And the people, the volunteers, the can-doers who make community sport what it is. A gentleman from Argyll and Bute Council told us, community sport hubs are not about buildings, they're about people. Leisure and Culture Dundee said sports development through the hubs was about the nurture of volunteers to pursue their ambitions, dreams, visions and aims. Volunteers should be given clear information, we were told, about what's been asked of them and what we expect and what they can expect in return. Atlantis Leisure, widely seen as a paragon of community-led facilities, talked about taking the pain out of volunteering. Their chairman told us if it was administration, we said we would do it. If it was netball girls said that we'd love to get new tunics, but we can't afford them, we would get them new tunics. It was small things, he said, that makes the big difference. Other witnesses spoke of the social value of local clubs. They provide a network of volunteers, we're told, foster a sense of belonging, bring people together through a sense of pride and collective purpose. It was even suggested their strength can provide an indication of the levels of well-being in our communities. Development of community sport hubs is the prevailing direction of policy, of course, and we heard much that sounds positive there. However, several witnesses advise us not to overlook those clubs and individuals that we all know about doing valuable work outside that model. Increasing participation, particularly among hard-to-reach groups, is crucial, of course. We're talking about young people in deprived areas, teenage girls, black and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities who have been put off sport at school and, of course, the older generation. It was Mark Twain who said, "I'm pushing 60 and that's enough exercise for me, and that might be, that for me. But as more of us live longer, such a view becomes less tenable. Indeed, one witness talks about a demand from the over 60s and over 70s for something called walking football, which, given a recent five-a-side injury to my deputy convener, might be might be appropriate. I don't know what you'd say to that, Bob. He's already walking football, I think. We are told accessibility is not just about affordability and proximity. Yes.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It was information for the member. I think there are volunteers already there to take people through walking football. They're called Rangers.
Duncan McNeill.
You're not going to draw me on that one. I mean, I'm feeling enough hurt. I'm still not ready to talk about that. Certainly not publicly, Margot. We were told accessibility was not just about affordability and proximity. It's also about allowing people who are entering their working lives and beyond that to find time to take part in sport. At the other end of the age spectrum, Swimming Scotland reported that 25% of children leave primary school unable to swim, the figure being the highest in poorest areas. One of Save the Children Scotland's ambassador, 16-year-old Stephanie, said, "We're just asking for the opportunity to swim." This is really important because it means that you can stay safe and fit and connected. Teenage girls are often one of the groups it's notoriously hard to get into sport. And NHS Scotland therefore chose to try something different in putting together the Fit for Girls project. Rather than see the girls as a problem, they asked, might it not be better to seek their buy-in at the point of design? And the Robertson Trust echoed that approach. They pointed to the success of Girls on the Move, an initiative which has really achieved, they said, by that target group having a say in the development of the programme. And in that way, the girls were able to take part in activities that were of interest to them. Dance, boxercise, yoga. And the result was that they recorded an impressive rate of continued participation, promoting personal development alongside the girls becoming more active. What of facilities? We frequently hear that there aren't enough, or what's there is expensive, or it's difficult to reach, or if it's poor quality. Access to the school's estate appears to be a recurring problem and theme, already in our evidence about access to those facilities that are springing up. Sports Scotland are to report on that matter, and I'm sure it will be keenly read, even if it's out with the timeline of our inquiry. Schools are part of what is out there, or perhaps what's not out there. I was amused, Presiding Officer, to read a submission from Ayr United Football Academy when it was asked in our questionnaire to list 3 issues about facilities. They wrote lack of, 2, lack of, 3, lack of, in no particular order. And that was their view of things, so surely we can address some of that. Even when you have somewhere to go, there is a concern about how the place will be treated. Secretary of Broxburn United Sports Club was relieved to report his fears had gone unrealised, and he was really worried about vandalism. And he said, but nothing like that has happened. In the 2 years since it opened, the kids treat the place as their own. Before I finish, I want to touch on a recurring theme, Presiding Officer, so much of the committee's work, and that's preventive health.
It's your last minute.
I should then recognise the final whistle from yourself and sit down at that point, I think. Thank you very much.
No, you have another minute.
Oh, I thought I'd... Well, we can't do it. Well, I was addressing the issue of preventive health, if I can find it. The idea of GP referrals to the sport was mentioned by a number of witnesses, but most progress has been made by Atlantis Leisure. The chairman told us the project was just a year old, but already the results were stunning. and he described it as a game changer. I'm conscious, and I suppose this was an important point that needs to be made, I'm conscious that a lot of our evidence has so far come from exemplar organisations. They have really, I think, committee members would agree, their enthusiasm and what they can achieve in our communities comes right across in their evidence. Their enthusiasm is infectious, but we need to recognise that what we are dealing with is the enthusiasts, the real committed people who are delivering. And definitely I'm going to sit down before you do blow the final whistle.
Thank you very much. We are incredibly tight for time, and I call on Shona Robertson, Minister, maximum 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to be able to take part in today's debate and welcome the Health and Sport Committee's inquiry into community sport. I had the great privilege of attending the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and there was, of course, a considerable number of outstanding performances in both. And, of course, as a nation, we had some great performances from the Scottish Olympians within the team. These athletes have inspired many to set themselves goals, work hard and be all they can be. And, of course, now it's about keeping the momentum going for 2 years towards 2014. I'm particularly pleased to hear in John Swinney's budget statement that we have an additional £1 million to support our athletes prepare for the Games in 2 years' time. But one of the abiding memories of London 2012 is the contribution made by the volunteers, by the Games makers, and of course it was good to see many of them at the parade last Friday. And this army of volunteers, of course, gave their time freely to support the delivery of what was undoubtedly the most successful Olympics and Paralympics ever. And there are undoubtedly lessons to be learnt in the way we take forward our own preparations for 2014, but also as we reflect on the role of volunteers more generally. And I know this is an important area for the inquiry, because I don't think we can underestimate the impact of volunteering in sport. They make a vital contribution to sport on a daily basis, whether that's carrying out the activities of washing strips to sitting on the boards of governing bodies. It's all an important contribution. And the voluntary sporting community comprises about a fifth of the population, which are members of Scotland's 13,000 sports clubs. It's an enormous effort and a cause for celebration. And I would reiterate a key priority for the Scottish Government as we head towards Glasgow and beyond. Now, Sports Scotland is working in partnership with Volunteer Development Scotland and other key stakeholders to ensure that the volunteer workforce is recruited, trained, supported and rewarded for their valuable contribution to Scottish sport and wider civic society. We can't take them for granted, and we must make sure that we support them as best we can. Now, elite athlete performance has been the focus of attention over the last few weeks, the great performances that we have seen. But of course, the most important outcome from 2012 and 2014 is legacy and ensuring that Scotland becomes a more active nation. The need to tackle levels of inactivity in the population are well known, and while we have 72% of young people meeting the recommended levels of activity, only 39% of adults do, and of course older adults are even more of a challenge. And yet we know, yes, of course.
Hansala Malik.
Thank you very much for taking that intervention. I'm just wondering whether the government would consider actually rolling out free places for our schools to participate in sporting activities, and more importantly, all the small groups and clubs that we have up and down Scotland to have facilities given to them free of charge till the Commonwealth Games. This would be a good pilot project for us to see whether the youth actually take up the sport, and also the benefits that could be created if we continued it for the future.
Minister.
I think part of the solution to that are the community sports hubs, because part of the requirement that Sports Scotland ask of a hub and the partners within the hub is about affordability and making sure that there are no affordability issues as barriers. And it's not just affordability, though. We need to make sure that hubs and the clubs within the hubs are welcoming to everyone. Because it's not just about money or physical access, it's about the welcome that you get, and that's important. But we do know that physical inactivity kills more people worldwide than even obesity or alcohol excess, causes some 2,500 deaths a year in Scotland, costs the NHS over £90 million a year. So there's a big gain for us if we can get people to be more active. And progress is being made on the National Physical Activity Implementation Plan that I announced in May, which will explore opportunities to embed physical activities in all areas of government policy. One area, of course, is our investment in Pass for All, already getting 10,000 people a year more active through walking, a very simple way of getting people active. And I'm very pleased again to hear John Swinney talk about his budget commitment of £6 million additional funding for cycling initiatives, because again, an easy way of getting people more active. So increasing opportunities for everyone to be more active does lie at the heart of our legacy ambitions, and sport has a role to play in this effort. I've mentioned community sports hubs already, but they are very, very important. And I was very pleased that Duncan McNeill made reference to the hubs in positive terms, because they are, I think, the answer to unlocking some of our resources, whether that's within the school estate or whether it's within clubs, that we open those doors to wider membership. They're very well located within the heart of communities, and they are very much our priority, with 150 being established by 2016, with at least 50% being based in schools. Sport Scotland is making great progress supporting local authorities. We now have 66 up and running, offering a wide range of activities across sports. Very briefly.
I thank the Minister. The Minister will know that there are a number of community sports hubs currently looking to take over buildings owned by the City Council, and there's an example in Dundee that I'm sure she's aware of. Can she say what she can work with the local authorities to perhaps make it easier for them to buy these facilities from the councils?
Minister, and you need to conclude.
Yes, well, we've already put in place ways of doing that, and there'll be more announcements on the Community Management Fund in due course. But I want to conclude on schools, a very important area for us. We're making very good progress on PE and active schools, but there is more to be done, and I want to take the opportunity today to announce that we will be developing a new youth sports strategy designed to increase activity levels of our young people. Included within that will be a look at the role of competitive sport. I want to involve a new youth sport panel, many of whom have joined us in the gallery today, in helping us to inform and shape our policy on sport and physical activity. And I hope that's something that will be welcomed, and I'll be happy to speak to the committee about that in more detail when I give evidence next month. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I look forward to hearing the comments of members across the chamber.
Thank you. I now call Patricia Ferguson, a very strict 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I at the outset congratulate the Health and Sport Committee for bringing forward this short debate and for the inquiry that they have now embarked upon, and can I congratulate the convener on his excellent exposition of the issues under consideration. We have had a remarkable summer of sport, with tremendous athletes, too many to mention individually, taking part at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And as if that wasn't enough, Andy Murray then went on to compliment his Olympic medals with his first Grand Slam trophy. But even great athletes have to start somewhere, and I've listened to many of them over the years talk about how their careers began. For some, it was at school where an enthusiastic teacher spotted their potential. For others, a parent encouraged them to get involved. And for many, it was a particular coach encountered early in their careers that set them on the path to success. Now, not everyone will want or be able to make sport their career, but coaches are also crucial to the enjoyment of a sport. So I would suggest to the committee that they consider seriously the role of coaches in their deliberations. Many are volunteers. Many are parents who've taken on the role because their daughter or son has an interest. And I would cite as an example of this Sapphire Gymnastics in Glasgow, run by parents and with its own mum's gymnastic display team as a good example. And of course, we require our coaches to be disclosure checked, and we want them to be trained to a level that allows them to safely operate in their sport. And it shouldn't be any other way. But do we support them enough in this process? Is it too expensive for them to gain qualifications? Is there a way to help them to continue and to assist them to recruit others to share the job? The question of facilities is also key, Presiding Officer, and nowhere is this more important than in our schools. They can be the community hub that supports the sporting life of an area. And in my own constituency, John Paul Academy now operates its own football academy for pupils. The Minister might like to visit that in connection with the announcement she made today. But that was really only possible because they had the pitches on which to do it, and some extremely enthusiastic staff and pupils. And the committee might therefore, and I'm sure it will, want to look at the availability of facilities and the cost to clubs of using them. And Duncan McNeill rightly mentioned the issue of encouraging women and girls to remain active throughout their lives. And for many women and girls, the lack of quality changing accommodation to accompany what might be good playing fields or other sporting facilities can also be a very serious deterrent indeed. Again, in my constituency, we have the possibility of a paddle sports centre being created on the Forth and Clyde Canal, which will give people the opportunity to become involved in canoeing and kayaking. But if its funding applications are successful, this facility could also help to keep elite paddlers in Scotland, as they would no longer have to enrol at Nottingham University to be able to use the facilities there. So the flexibility of facilities is also important. And sports hubs, as Duncan McNeill and the Minister identified and is identified in the motion before us today, are a very valuable tool. But when you consider that the number of sports clubs in Scotland is at least 80 times greater than the number of planned hubs, there is clearly a lot more that needs to be done to support our local clubs. Presiding Officer, I said at the beginning of this debate that the Health and Sport Committee were to be congratulated for bringing forward this debate about grassroots and community sport, and they should be. But I am genuinely disappointed that the Government has not yet tabled a debate in this chamber that would have given us all the opportunity to celebrate the outstanding achievements of our athletes in the Olympic and Paralympic Games and, of course, Andy Murray's first Grand Slam victory. The 80,000+ people who turned out in cities across Scotland last weekend demonstrate that that enthusiasm has not waned. So I would respectfully ask the Minister in closing to agree to a debate in the chamber at the earliest possible opportunity, perhaps one without motion where we don't need to divide. That will give us all the opportunity to celebrate this wonderful summer of sport and to discuss in a serious and considered way, I'm in my last minute, Mr Crawford, how we harness all that interest and enthusiasm to ensure that Scotland has a real sporting legacy that takes us to the Commonwealth Games in 2014 and hopefully to the Youth Olympics in Glasgow in 2018, and leads to us all becoming part of a fitter and healthier nation along the way. And I wish the committee very well in its deliberations.
Many thanks. I now call on Annette Millen with a very strict 5 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Now that we're halfway through the Health and Sport Committee's inquiry into community sport and have been made aware of many of the issues surrounding its success by governing bodies, clubs and participants in sport, I'm pleased we're now having this debate to give the opportunity to members of the Parliament who are not on the committee to put forward their own thoughts on how we should be encouraging and supporting sporting activity in our local communities. And surely there couldn't be a better time for looking at how we provide sporting opportunities for people in Scotland of all ages. We have a serious and increasing obesity problem, even amongst children and young people, and far too few of us achieve even the recommended minimum level of activity each week, despite knowing that lack of physical activity is the greatest contributor to coronary artery disease. And yet against this background, we've just enjoyed a summer of fantastic sporting success in the UK, with Scottish athletes featuring high in the Olympic medals board and culminating in Andy Murray's enormous achievement of winning the 2012 US Open. We saw the excitement last week in London as the Olympians and Paralympians toured the capital city, and on Sunday we saw large crowds of people out in Edinburgh to applaud Sir Chris Hoy and other Scottish athletes, and the excitement of the youngsters in Dunblane as they queued up to meet Andy Murray was palpable. But that buzz will fade, perhaps not until after the Commonwealth Games, but fade it will unless we take steps to involve many more people in sporting activity. Many of those who have given evidence to the committee have stressed that this must start in childhood, and that it must be fun for participants. As Kim Atkinson of the Scottish Sports Association said, primary schools provide the opportunity for every young person to be physically literate, to run, jump, throw, catch and swim. And if being regularly active becomes a cultural norm for children, if it's fun and they develop confidence, that's a great start. And in later life, if they decide to participate in Sport A or Activity B, they'll have the skills and confidence to do so, and they'll think that taking part will be fun. But there aren't enough qualified PE teachers in Scotland at the present time to help our youngsters achieve physical literacy, with only 1,500 full-time qualified PE staff in post, a drop of 7% since 2007. I think that must be concerning for a government which aims to ensure 2 hours per week of formal PE for all primary school pupils and which has preventative spend as a key commitment. It's been estimated that increasing physical activity by 1% per year for 5 years would save nearly 160 lives per year. So increasing levels of participation in sport and physical recreational activity must be the cornerstone of discussions on a strategy for sport and link in with other policy areas like health, education and the local environment. Much of the evidence received so far by the Health and Sport Committee has focused on 2 issues: volunteering and the development of community sports hubs. Volunteers are the lifeblood of the 13,000 sports clubs in Scotland, providing coaching, competition and development opportunities for young people at community level. Many don't even see themselves as volunteers, but merely as friends or relatives of club members who are just helping out. Skills of all kinds are required, from coaching to fundraising, secretarial work and training or participation in governance. There are barriers to volunteering which could easily be overcome, such as a perceived lack of time, a lack of knowledge on how to get involved, and a lack of confidence or support to start volunteering. The Scottish Sports Association is calling for more businesses to become involved by allowing employees time off for volunteering through a programme of employer-supported volunteering, which could be particularly useful in more deprived areas where it's harder to recruit volunteers. Interest is growing in community sports hubs, which bring together in one place local sports clubs, volunteers and other local groups such as schools and youth organisations to share facilities and information on becoming involved and to provide access to local people. There are already a number of very successful ventures which have inspired more and more local people to become involved in increasing numbers of activities. And these should be used as role models to improve access and facilities across Scotland. I like the suggestion from Paths for All that consideration be given to renaming community sports hubs as active community hubs in order to maximise accessibility, on the assumption that physical activity will stimulate further interest in sporting activity for those of all ages who might otherwise never become involved. Presiding Officer, we live in potentially exciting times for our nation's health and well-being, and I hope the committee's inquiry will help to inspire communities to build on the excellent examples which already exist and achieve a legacy of a fitter, happier, active and more community-spirited nation as an appropriate tribute to the recent successes of our magnificent sporting heroes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now turn to the open debate, which is oversubscribed in terms of requests to speak. I can give members a maximum of 4 minutes at the moment, but if they were to take a bit less, I would appreciate it. And I call Richard Lyle to be followed by Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a former member of the Health and Sport Committee, can I first welcome this debate in regard to support for community sport and compliment the convener and deputy convener for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. Sport is the lifeblood of any nation. In Scotland, there are many sports which are run by thousands of volunteers. I am informed that there are nearly 13,000 clubs and 150,000 volunteers running various sports throughout Scotland. Volunteers are the unsung heroes and deserve all the help that this Parliament can give to ensure that they all take part in a particular sport and that volunteers are encouraged, and I welcome this inquiry. I welcome the support that this SNP government is giving to sport throughout various projects and the substantial funding which has seen much-needed facilities being built throughout Scotland. I also compliment Sport Scotland on what they have given and have done for various clubs in Scotland. I was able during the summer, along with other members of the Health and Sport Committee, to visit some facilities being built in the East End of Glasgow to accommodate the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Commonwealth Sports Arena and the Sir Chris Hoy Velodrome is indeed a facility which will serve the people of Glasgow well, incorporating a velodrome, sports track, sports halls, sauna, plunge pool. I am sure that parties in this chamber will welcome the millions of pounds spent in the Glasgow area, and I am sure that the facilities and local houses built will also enhance the life of the local people in Glasgow as a whole. It is a facility all Scotland will be proud of.
The Government has also provided significant money for the establishment of sports hubs, with nearly 141 to be opened. Sports hubs are a welcome addition to facilities already available in local schools. Most hubs have been implemented through the work of local councils, and I would commend the Minister for her work in this field. Pardon the pun. I note that the number of sports hubs to be provided is to be raised, and I would agree with Sports Scotland that every effort should be made to raise this, even this level. And I quote the comments of Stuart Harris, Sports Scotland, when he said that he wants to be greedy. Every single secondary school in Scotland would be a hub of some sort, not just for sport, but for community activities. The governing bodies are doing a huge amount of work to support volunteers through partnership programmes, and with support from Sports Scotland, working with local authorities and sports councils. Let us also not forget the work being carried out by NHS Scotland, who are adding in the design of sports hubs as a health-promoting resource that provides access to advice about smoking. I think I should maybe take that advice. Healthy eating and alcohol. E-learning resources are also providing individuals with support and advice on the benefits of physical activity. I think I'm going to beat your 4 minutes. Everyone must commit to aid the promotion of sport and help the work carried out by thousands of volunteers. I compliment the Health and Sports Committee on an excellent report.
Many thanks. I'm most grateful. I now call Kezia Dugdale to be followed by Gil Patterson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I very much welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate this afternoon, and also welcome the community sports hubs, which are of course a critical part of this whole agenda. But the contribution I'd like to make to today's debate is about those 13,000 other clubs across Scotland who are a step below that hub model or wouldn't directly benefit from it at the moment. I wanted to talk about 2 specific examples in Edinburgh that I work really closely with. The first one of which is Loch End Football Club, who have huge ambitions to grow and develop as a local club. They're just 10 minutes up the road. They've got a fantastic view over the crags and everything. It's a great place to go and visit, Minister, if you're ever short of places to go. That particular club are desperately keen to take more ownership of the facilities that they use, and they've currently got their eyes on the Seafield pitches down in Malcolm Chisholm's constituency, which are currently run by Edinburgh Leisure. They would like to take over the ownership of those pitches. They're the only club that actually use them just now. They believe that they could run them better, that they could maintain them better, and crucially they wouldn't have to pay the extortionate letting fees week after week. They could do so much more with those facilities if they ran them themselves, and as a co-op sponsored MSP I couldn't agree with that more, and I'll be working with the club directly to help them realise that ambition, and it's all the easier now that Edinburgh City Council is run by both the Labour and the SNP, committed to a cooperative council agenda. You think this would be easy. However, they could also be greatly assisted by the government in terms of that move towards community ownership. And there are many good examples across Scotland of clubs taking over the ownership of the facilities that they operate within, but they're also often born out of a crisis, a particular facility that's closed by a local authority or needs help. We should be looking at this agenda as a progressive step for all community sports facilities. It shouldn't just be about a crisis point, it should be about the development of clubs and how to help them become more sustainable in their own right. I know that the Sports Minister in June last year announced a community ownership support scheme of £500,000 worth of funding. I asked Spice to dig out a little bit of detail about whether any of that money had been allocated yet, and Sport Scotland seem to think it's coming in their direction, but they're not sure when, and they don't really know if it'll be them that's going to administer the fund or when they'll be able to start giving out some of that money. In fact, they're beginning to think that it might be linked to the government's Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill, which of course has been delayed for a further year now. So it could be up to 3.5 years before any of this money lands in the hands of the people who desperately need it. I wonder if the Minister could comment today on just how quickly clubs might be able to aspire to access that cash, because I think it would be very, very welcome. The other club I wanted to talk about was City of Edinburgh Basketball Club, Presiding Officer, which are based in Portobello High School. They've got their own problems at the moment because members may be aware that Portobello High desperately need a new school and that there's a huge debate about the site for their school, and I'm doing everything I can to support them in that. But City of Edinburgh Basketball have a huge number of young women competing in competitive sport, young teenage women playing team sports. It's fantastic. We should be doing everything we can to support them. They want to grow as well, and they need to have a more sustainable future. They're looking at perhaps becoming a social enterprise so they can access more pots of cash. And I'm trying to bring together Loch End Football Club, City of Edinburgh Basketball Club and Loch End Boxing Club into one sort of East End team sport effort, so that together I can help them access funding streams which are currently just for multi-club sports. But I know that there's a development worker in Social Enterprise Scotland who's focused on sports development, and she does a fantastic job, but her post is only in place for 6 months or more. It's part funded by Sports Scotland, part funded by the Robertson Trust, and I understand that the Robertson Trust have removed half of the funding for the future. So the very person who's designed with enhancing the sustainability of sports clubs is about to have their post taken away. Kind of speaks to the issues that we're addressing today. I would really like the Minister to commit to perhaps extending that post and address some of the issues I've highlighted today, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Call Gill Patterson to be followed by George Adam.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. When taking evidence on support for community sport, the first and most vital fact that strikes you is that without the army of volunteers, sport, and for that matter, healthy activity would grind to a halt. We are blessed with 150,000 registered sport volunteers in Scotland. But it was evident from those involved in sport, that's sporting agencies, sporting professionals and the volunteers, that over and above the 150,000, we have many mums and dads and others who are significantly assisting but don't consider themselves to be volunteers. One of the aspects of those who seek to encourage more volunteering is to target parents who participate in sports that their children are involved in. These parents utilise a number of skills that are invaluable. Sadly, once their child either moves on or gives up on that sport, the parent also drops out. The aim is to find ways to encourage these parents to continue to participate long after the child moves on. From the evidence gathered, one way to do this is to work across sports, drawing on the strengths in one organisation of sport and spreading it across the whole host of others. Therefore, cutting down on duplicated models and ensuring that the small pot of dedicated volunteers with experience is not spread too thinly. Looking at the concept of sports hubs, they provide an excellent opportunity to gather the best of volunteering talent from across the community, so that by and large, the backroom staff, or if I can use the term loosely, the voluntary administration is not duplicated sport by sport or club by club. The other aspect of hubs is to utilise the facilities to the fullest capacity and ensure that they are accessible, as accessible as possible. A school, for instance, full of equipment, playing areas, gym halls, etc., being used only during school hours is a waste of scarce resources and could bring so much benefit to the wider community. Of course, these barriers, of course, there are barriers to be overcome if we are fully to utilise these facilities. School buildings that were built through PPP bring an obvious example, where the cost to hire out space and equipment is vastly overinflated, which is a clear barrier to local clubs. Also, some local authorities can be too precious with regards to the resources in a school and restrict either the times when the facilities are available or who it can be permitted to use the place in the first instance. Sometimes people in power take their eye off the ball and don't recognise that school children need to be catered for not only during school hours, but out with those hours as well. If the school truly becomes part of the community, and for the community then and part of the community, then the behaviour in school and towards the school will be very positive. The added benefit is the prospect that if encouraged from an early age through school or local clubs, people will engage long-term activity that will enhance their lives and lead to them volunteering in later years. Can I finish by saying that I was extremely impressed by the genuine enthusiasm and commitment shown from across the sector, giving evidence. That was the professionals, the individuals, the volunteers, right across it. It was palatable, the enthusiasm that they showed.
You must finish now.
This Parliament should recognise the hard work and commitment given by professionals and volunteers that keep Scotland active, and I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I must point out to the Chamber there really are no extra seconds available. George Adam to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome this debate in the Health and Sport Committee, and my time on the committee was also short. It was only 2 meetings plus one where I turned up to see, specifically talking about this one issue. And Duncan McNeill, I was there when Duncan McNeill heard about walking football for older people. I myself have been told that I've had that style of play for a number of years now. It might be something to do with age. But the hard to reach to people in sport, getting people to engage in sport, is something I've been quite interested in myself in my own constituency. This year I played football with Brian Thompson, a constituent who, along with St Mirren and acquired brain injury group in Paisley, they've actually played together to have football so they can talk to one another and talk about all their issues and problems that they have, and play something that they do, get involved in sport and enjoy, which is playing football. And it's been extremely good just to see them go on. They've got to the stage now where they're developing their own football club further. In fact, they're talking to the SFA about having an acquired brain injury football league so that they can play other teams as well within, like a mini SPL and five-a-side. But even when I played for them for an hour and a half, and oh was I sore the next day, they actually played at a very good level because they enjoyed the football as well. And it just showed you the difference it could make to their lives. Another good example of this is the Renfrewshire Street stuff, where they managed to take street football, well, again, working with St Mirren locally, they managed to take football and other sports and the rugby coach out to the communities and discuss about in certain areas where the police tell them there's hotspots, where they can actually get them involved and see if anyone's got the ability and talent within sport, or just to be involved. And that in itself makes a massive difference to a lot of these younger people. I've had many times when I've gone to see some of the things happening, some of the stories would actually make your hair curl. But in the end, it's also extremely challenging, but it's the work that makes a big difference in our areas. In some of our areas, it's brought down antisocial behaviour by about 25%, so it obviously works. But I think the Minister's correct when she says in the Olympic Games, one of the biggest things was the volunteers. We've got 150,000 volunteers, it's already been mentioned, in sport, and they don't see themselves as volunteers because they're involved in their clubs. And one of the biggest issues that came out in some of it was the clubs, the rugby organisations in particular, Scottish Rugby Union were saying, is that the club structure is the most important thing, that they actually develop. The clubs, the more established clubs, are the ones that have got the whole community feel about them. Now, I know that's something we're trying to have with the hubs, but it's a difficult thing, and I know it's a challenging thing for us to get all these clubs together within the actual hubs themselves, but also in the same evidence session, there were various clubs, I think it was in Broxburn, where they actually said there was a whole stack of clubs from different sports working together. Like in my own area, I've got a traditional club like Kelburn Hockey Club, which incidentally gave us Emily Maguire, the bronze medalist in the hockey this year, and they've always excelled as a club and also as a sporting organisation because they've had generation of talent, plus generations of parents being involved and coming through. So I think we have to find a way to make sure that we can get everyone together with regards to making sure that we can have all the hubs like that. We've gone to a stage within Paisley where we've actually even got the amateur boxing club in Paisley involved in one of the hubs, and this in itself means that they're engagement all the time and they're talking with one another, and it means that they know exactly what's happening with everything else. Of course, money is always a major issue.
30 seconds.
I'm aware of that, Presiding Officer, and in order to get that across, I think it's always a major issue. And locally, we managed to put £10,000 per hub from the local authority within there. So I think we have to make sure that we have all the clubs and give them a reason for getting involved in the hubs so that they have a benefit for them as sporting organisations. But I can see from my time involved that I can see the difference it can make in people's lives, and that's the most important thing, because not only are we healthier, it also gives an opportunity to really be all we can be without using sport as a conduit.
Thanks very much, Mr Adams. We're extremely tight for time today. So speeches up to 4 minutes would be welcomed, less would be more in this regard, and we will have to let people know about cuts we're going to have to make. Next speaker is Jenny Mara, to be followed by Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Sports Minister won't be surprised. I'm going to start my remarks this afternoon by talking about our campaign to bring the National Football Academy to Dundee, and especially not surprised because I spent many days this summer running about with a T-shirt on saying exactly the same thing. She will also know that over 5,000 people have signed up to bring the Academy to Dundee, and nearly 1,000 people have sent her a direct letter by email outlining the reasons that it should come to our city. There's a lot of support for it in Dundee. This summer, the project was described as Dundee's sporting V&A, and I think that's a sign that people are very, very keen to make it happen. The working group, which is supported by the Minister's SNP Council colleagues in Dundee, is now at an advanced stage, and I've taken trips down to the centre in England to put our bid together, and I'm delighted that the Minister put forward the timetable for the bidding process just a couple of weeks ago. I think Dundee is united in wanting to bring the Football Academy to our city. I would like, though, to ask the Minister a couple of questions on the budget commitment surrounding the National Football Academy. Can I ask her to clarify in her closing remarks that the funding will be available for the Performance Academy? I've just totted up expenditure in the Scottish Government budget for the Young Scots Fund, which amounts to £24.7 million in the Young Scots Fund over 3 years. But if I understand it clearly, the Scottish Government manifesto promised £25 million to the National Sports Academy. So that commitment of the Young Scots Fund already falls slightly short. And also Fiona Hislop gave evidence to the Education and Culture Committee last year, committing other monies, I think to the tune of about £8 million, also from the Young Scots Fund to other cultural projects. So I think that is now in excess of about £32 million, but there's 24.7 in the budget over the next 3 years. So I'd be very grateful if the Minister could clarify in her closing remarks how much will be spent on the National Performance Academy, if it will all be coming from the Young Scots Fund, which seems to be a bit elastic, and if additional funds might be made available to fund it from the sports budget. Can I turn to the issue of tennis, because I was very excited this summer by our tennis success, and so much so that when Andy Murray took on Roger Federer in the Wimbledon final, I decided to do a survey of our tennis facilities in Dundee and spent a day going round with a video camera, and that video is online if anyone wants to see the state of our facilities in Dundee. We posted it and we had a lot of interest. Judy Murray tweeted me and she made a very powerful comment that Tennis Scotland then agreed with when I met with them, that you need to have good facilities if you're going to encourage children not just to try sport, but to maintain their interest and to keep coming back to sport. But it was clear, and I don't know if the ministers had a chance to see the video, that the facilities across our city are very different in the different communities. Indeed, in Lochee, the facility is rather disgraceful. It's overgrown. There are no lines on the tennis courts. Sure.
I'm just wondering if Jenny Mara is trying to say that this is a very recent phenomenon, or would she accept that if there's a problem with these facilities, it tends to perhaps goes back a few years to previous administrations' tenure?
Jenny Mara, 5 seconds,
The Minister makes a very fair point, and there's been underinvestment for years, but I think it's about life chances and opportunities for our children, and that she should look seriously at it.
Thanks very much. I now call on Mark MacDonald to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As I'll be joining the Health and Sport Committee next week, as a new member, I feel like I'm going to be joining this inquiry in the role of a half-time substitute, but I look forward to playing an active role in the remainder of the inquiry. I wasn't a member of the committee when I bid to speak in this debate, but that's how life works out sometimes. I too was interested by the notion of walking football, and it made me think that John Park's been telling tales about my midfield performances for the Parliament football team. In that respect, I make him look quick, so that must be where the comment was coming from. In terms of the Olympics and Paralympics over the summer, presiding officer, it made me cast my mind back to when I was an active member of Aberdeen Athletic Club. That was a good few years and a good few stone ago. But I recalled at the time when I was a member of the club a young athlete, a young sprinter who was there competing as a young lad and competing very well. And his name was Neil Fahy, and he was a gold medalist in the cycling at the Paralympic Games. And I think it emphasises the point that Patricia Ferguson was making, and I think one that I would recognise is that elite athletes don't just happen. They are often, they get their very start in sport often through local community clubs, through the coaching, through the encouragement at that level. Often, as Patricia Ferguson says, it is through a keen PE teacher or another teacher who may be taking one of the sporting clubs, who spots the potential in a child to go on and develop their skills as part of a club. And I agree as well with the point that Patricia Ferguson made. I think she might be worried that I'm agreeing with her quite so much, but in terms of the role that coaches have to play in this, I myself, before being elected to this chamber, was a youth coach for a local football team, Dice Boys Club. And I would say that coaches do have a key role to play, and it's often dedicated volunteers. Indeed, sometimes it's parents who've maybe either got a son or daughter who are involved with the club or have been involved with the club and want to give something back. The key consideration I think that needs to be borne in mind is around the issue of qualifications and support. I was very lucky that Dice Boys Club were very proactive at putting their coaches forward for their coaching badges. They were also very proactive at putting them forward for things like first aid courses and things like that, so that they would be able to react if there was a significant injury or the need to assist a player on the pitch. But that doesn't exist at every club, and often you have clubs where that support network isn't there, and we need to look at what we can do to encourage people to go through their coaching badges, things like that, because that will then encourage the children who are involved with that club to become better at the sport that they are participating in, and things should translate from there. Very briefly, I will give way.
Margaret MacDonald.
I wonder if the member would agree that it would be a good idea for clubs that don't have a lot of money for there to be some sort of national training scheme that they could buy into.
Mark MacDonald.
I'm always interested to look at these kind of things. I think we obviously have to look at what we can deliver within the resources that are available. But I think the member makes a valid point that obviously a lot of clubs do have very tight resources, and I know from my time as a youth football coach just how expensive it is to run a youth football club. Finally, presiding officer, community sport also needs support at a local level, and I was very disappointed to see the vote by Aberdeen City Council in relation to the football hub community stadium in Aberdeen. The council chiefs met with SFA officials in August regarding their wish to set up a regional hub in Aberdeen for football, and the SFA responded to their request that they didn't need to set up a regional hub as the 3 suitable facilities in the pipeline, i.e. the Sports Village, the Cove Rangers Stadium and the Aberdeen Football Club Stadium, would deliver this. The Labour Party then responded by saying to the SFA to stay out of politics, despite having invited them to comment in the first place, and then voted down the community stadium by taking the lease back from Calder Park. I think we need to look at what local councils are doing as well as what the government is doing.
Many thanks. Now call on Alison Johnson to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is indeed a timely debate, occurring as it does at a time when we're hearing a lot about Olympic legacy, about preventative spending and, of course, about community empowerment. I welcome Duncan McNeill's comments earlier on the fact that we have to follow both strands, elite and grassroots sport. I think that's very important, and I welcome too the focus on volunteers and local sports clubs and what they bring to this very important agenda. I too support the Scottish Sports Association's call for employer-supported volunteering, because those who volunteer, not only do they give something to the community, they get a lot back themselves. It empowers a lot of people, it gives structure to a day, it builds confidence, it builds skill. It really is a win-win situation to support people to volunteer. It certainly isn't just about the building. I mean, Colin Keir and I can both testify to perhaps early days in Edinburgh Athletic Club in a little hut in Fords Road in Edinburgh, and it was more about a community of people taking part in a sport they were passionate about. But it is also about buildings. Liz McColgan recently spoke at the Festival of Politics, and she noted that just after the Olympics, 112 youngsters came to her local club and paid £3 each, and there was only one toilet. So I'd like to think that if we're going to build on a legacy, and obviously as we build towards our own Commonwealth Games in 2014, that we're ready for that sort of inspired rush to take part in a sport. We have, groups of cyclists here in Edinburgh who are running the velodrome, and they may not be a geographical community, but they're a very committed community, and they're looking after what can only be described as a fairly neglected sports asset. And one thing I'd like to ask is if any buildings that are built for these Commonwealth Games are better maintained than those that were built for Edinburgh's Commonwealth Games. It's one thing to unveil a plaque and say, wow, look at this, but it is quite another to invest in that for the long term. I think community sports hubs have a great part to play in complementing existing sports provision. But we have to back this up with other activity. We are still striving to reach 2 hours PE per week by a qualified PE teacher, and I do think it's important that children have access to such quality provision by someone who has been trained for several years. Volunteers have their place, but sometimes we see very young volunteers who simply don't have the experience as yet to take on classes on their own. In Edinburgh Athletic Club, we have a waiting list for juniors waiting to get involved in track and field, and that waiting list is purely because we do not have enough volunteer coaches. And this is a club who does support volunteer coaches, paying fees to take them through their coaching qualifications. And Brian Whittle, a former Olympic medalist, has asked that we look at better funding for coaches, and this is something that I think is worth investigating, given the demands on time and finance that many volunteers face. Some can afford to do so, some simply can't. I think as well we need to look at the fact that our elite athletes often are competing. When we have arm's length companies delivering sports facilities, as we do in Edinburgh, they have commercial interests, and sometimes in Edinburgh, for example, the indoor track is let out for antiques fairs, for children's clothes sales. This prevents athletes who desperately need access to the only indoor facility in the region from training that day in that way. I would like to thank the committee and all the witnesses for their work. I think we're all absolutely committed to ensuring that access to sport in Scotland is completely the norm. It becomes part of everyday life. And, that's something that I warmly welcome, and I will do all that I can as we strive towards that goal. Thank you.
Many thanks. Well done. I now call on Stuart Stevenson to be followed by John Park. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate the committee on bringing forward this excellent debate on community sport. It's worth remembering 100 years ago, mortality in life was infection-based. Today, mortality in life is based largely on chronic disease. And underpinning chronic disease that kills so many in our society is obesity and lack of physical activity. I'm very grateful to the whips in my party for putting me in my new office on the 5th floor of the MSP block. That has meant I'm already fitter because I don't use the lift. And I'm going to be monitoring the activities of everybody in this chamber and beyond, because 90% of us can be using the stairs, and we should be doing so and setting an example by using the opportunities that we have to exploit opportunities to become fitter. As Minister, I walked 550 miles as a Minister. Now, I have to say that sounds a hell of a lot, but it was 5 years. When I compare that with the elite athlete in my family who's been a world champion in orienteering twice, his training schedule is 160 miles a week. And that neatly leads me into something that I haven't seen mentioned at all in this debate. And that is the natural asset that is on our doorstep, that we have in abundance in Scotland, and that is our rural environment, where many sports can be undertaken. Access is easy, the cost is often modest, and orienteering is an excellent example of that. Simply a pair of running shoes, simply the open countryside, simply a few people to organise things. It's not an elite sport because it's not in the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics, but it is one that engages huge numbers of people across Scotland. And it's something you can enter at every level of fitness and every level of age. They have string events for children in P1 and P2, right up to people who are in their 90s who are still participating in the sport. Because age I'm the second oldest person to speak in this debate. Age should not be and is not a barrier to fitness. In Australia, some 30 years ago, I happened to see on morning television in the hotel I was staying in, somebody being interviewed for the 40th consecutive year. He had won the over 40s marathon in Australia. He was now over 90, and he was as fit as a 40-year-old. That opportunity exists for us all, and we should encourage people to use recreation as a gateway to sport, because sport is, of course, about competing. And if we compete with people, we get engaged, we get reinforced, we have social benefits. And speaking of social benefits, to diverge away to something else seemingly quite different, there's a report today there have been 703 pubs have shut in Scotland in the last 5 years. Oh, good, we're much fitter, you might say. But actually, some of the most successful pubs that have survived as community pubs are now getting their own sports teams. So sometimes it's quite unlikely places that can be a spur to getting people engaged in physical activity, to getting people engaged in community sports. So let's be innovative. Look to the countryside for opportunity. Let's be innovative. Let's look to even our pubs. Let me just close by saying that perhaps the convener was unwise to quote in the way he did Mark Twain, who, of course, was one of the least fit people. He said, giving up smoking is easy. I've done it thousands of times. Not the example we want to encourage. Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Now call on John Park to be followed by Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I declare an interest as a Director of Scottish Women's Football before entering this debate? I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate and congratulate the Health and Sport Committee in bringing it to the Chamber. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about today is about the challenges that face us just now and what we would like to see in the future. But I also think we should give some consideration to some of the achievements that we've had over recent years, not just in terms of sporting achievements, but actually people who have been organised around sport and making it happen in communities right across Scotland. And I look at Fife, for example, and remember myself playing Summer League football when I was 11-year-old, which is a few years ago now, and maybe it was 11 against 11 on a full-side park, 22 boys essentially playing on the Saturday, the only team of that age group playing. Now, I go down to that park in Petrevie in Dunfermline quite often now on a Saturday and see 1,000 boys and girls playing there on a Saturday morning. And all the parents, all the coaches, everyone who's involved in that, making that happen. But the reality is the facilities haven't changed much in those 20-odd years. So while we've managed to do great things in terms of organising around sport and particularly widening access to sport, there is obviously a challenge in terms of the facilities going forward. And if I have a look at another football club that I've been involved in Fife called Bayside, who started in 2003 with 13 players and 2 parents, who now have over 400 registered players, 80 coaches, over 24 teams, you could understand why those challenges are there and those pressures on our existing sporting facilities. And we often think about just people taking part in the game, whatever the sport is, on the actual day. But of course, if you're going to do it properly, you need to train, you need to participate, you need to practice during the week. So I think that the real big challenge we've got here is not just when the sporting facilities are used in game time, but the challenge in the midweek, particularly in the winter months, when it is a bit more difficult for parents, a bit more challenging for volunteers as well. The other thing I would say is that there are a number of still great and significant barriers to people wanting to participate in sport. And this came up, and Alison Johnson mentioned this, in the Festival of Politics event that I was very fortunate to chair recently in the Parliament. And while we had excellent contributions from people like John Beattie, with Liz McColgan there, Alison Walker and Kim Atkinson, the contributions from the people, the volunteers, the questions, the eagerness, the thoroughness, the enthusiasm from these people is absolutely something that should make us all as parliamentarians want to create the right climate for these people to succeed and make a difference for our young people, and also people who then want to continue sport as they get older, if it's maybe not even in a competitive way as well. And finally, Presiding Officer, the one thing that I'd like to close on is sport and its role in access to employment. And we haven't said much about that today, but there is one anomaly that perhaps could raise with the Minister here. With regards to the apprenticeship framework, Achieving Excellence in Sports Performance, which is essentially for professional athletes and is only taken forward by football clubs in this country. One of the challenges we have that with our apprenticeship system is everyone has to be, quite rightly, of employed status. But if you look at the lack of employment opportunities in a number of other sports where we could have people achieving excellence, I think if we would address this normally, it would make a huge difference.
Many thanks. Now call on Margaret MacDonald. I regret I can only give you 2 minutes, Ms MacDonald. Yes,
I regret too that time is tight. However, thank you for the 2 minutes, Presiding Officer. There's a host of, rather a great gust of information I've brought here from the Cross-Party Group in Sports recent seminar on this very topic, and I'll share these obviously with the convener of the committee. I also want to say before I get down again that the business of a tennis academy surfaced this afternoon. Can I ask that instead of taking a decision on this right away, we could consider perhaps a broader academy, a rackets academy, because Scotland does well in rackets sports. There are people who have had to leave Scotland to get badminton facilities. The world champion in squash went to England and changed his nationality so that he could play and so on. So there's a good argument for looking at that. The other thing I would be very careful of in terms of looking at sport as something that can be stimulated simply by the provision of facilities is that in Lochee, you'll know it yourself, it was because there wasn't the right person there at the right time to be enthusiastic and start building. And so they end up with this sort of thing like Atlantis in Oban. 20 years ago, a group of people said that they would take over the swimming pool. They've got the most fantastic setup now. So therefore, I think it's very, very important that volunteers are looked at and given training. Many of them need training for confidence and knowledge before they can even think about doing anything to help in their communities. There's also a model that perhaps she might want to look at if she's going to go ahead with the organisation referred to earlier on by Jenny Mara, and that's the Robertson Trust. This is a trust, very successful, that goes into very small community development and support for sport. And lastly, can I commend the 2 speeches of Alison and Mark MacDonald as being chock full of common sense. I hope the Minister reads lots of them, and the committee chairman.
Many thanks. We now move to closing speeches, and I call on Liz Smith. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Deputy Presiding Officer, thank you very much. I've listened very carefully to what's been a very insightful debate, and quite clearly the major question is about where do we go from here? How do we turn the celebration, the warm words and the goodwill into concrete actions? And I've been listening extremely carefully to what the suggestions are from members. And I think, broadly speaking, there are 4 things that we have to do. And I would suggest that the starting block is to ensure that we are building upon projects which we know have worked and for which there is therefore both quantitative and qualitative evidence that progress has been made. Now, we all have our own constituency examples of these, but for my mind, I think that the first thing is not just about expanding the numbers involved, because that's extremely important, but it's much more about the quality of the experience, and that, as points were raised in the debate this afternoon, it's about an ongoing experience on a longer-term basis. Secondly, it is about access to professionally trained PE teachers and trainers, as well as making life very much easier to people, for people to volunteer. And I note very carefully what the Sports Association has said in terms of these employer-related schemes. I thought John Park came out with a very good thing about the apprenticeship scheme, because they do make some obstacles in the way of people who, at the moment, I think are more inclined to opt out of volunteering rather than opt in. And it's very good to hear that the Scottish Government is about to build in a new sports strategy. I think that's essential. And it's also good that you're making some progress about the 2 hours of PE. But I would, Minister, ask you urgently to address the problem about the qualified PE teachers. We have seen a decline in that, and I think Margaret MacDonald has made this point several times in Parliament. That quality is essential. Thirdly, it's about improving the facilities rather than just having more facilities. Jenny Mara raised the point in Dundee about some of the facilities for tennis, which are quite simply not acceptable. They're not going to attract anybody to play there because of rundown playing fields or rundown changing rooms, or sadly in some cases rundown pavilions where there are obviously very considerable restrictions on the facilities. But I think it's also to do with ensuring that whatever strategy we come up with fully articulates with policies in other portfolios, whether that's in health, in transport, in housing, in education. These are the things that will make us succeed on that basis. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, I think all of us will probably be quite overawed by what happened in the summer in the Olympics and the Paralympics. But listening to these people talk on television and to write in the newspapers, they have all said very loud and clear to us that what has mattered most to them is what happens at a young age. That is the inspiration that they have had because of the young development in their early years. Andy Murray talked about entering a tournament, very major tournament, age 12, and the chap Patience in rowing, he was talking about having entered age 7. And I think it's that kind of performance that we need to aspire to. We have to captivate and inspire and educate them at that young age. We must urge on communities to build on the examples which we know have actually worked, and in doing so we can create a much more prosperous country as well as happier, healthier individuals, families and the communities in which they would work. That really is the legacy, and I think we have to learn the lesson from what our sporting heroes have told us.
Many thanks. Now call on Mark Griffin. Up to 4 minutes, please, Mark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've heard lots of positive examples in constituencies across the country where community sport is thriving. These projects have already been running, but what we have to do is use the enthusiasm from the Olympic and Paralympic Games and the upcoming Commonwealth Games to get more people participating in sport. The reasons for getting people involved in sport and physical activity from a health and well-being point of view are well rehearsed and widely agreed on. Now the challenge is how we get out and do it, and community sport has a massive part to play. Lots of people want to get out and get involved in sport and activity after what can only be described as a thoroughly inspiring summer of sport. What we have to do is ensure that the facilities we have are available and affordable. That will undoubtedly mean working with local authorities to open up the school estate, as mentioned by Duncan McNeill. More importantly, though, is that we support the people who give up their time to volunteer in our community sports clubs. Without the existing volunteers and encouraging new volunteers, it just won't be possible to accommodate the increasing number of participants we hope to see. That means that we have to incentivise volunteering, whether that's through the partnership between Sport Scotland and Young Scot to give young volunteers points in the Young Scot card for volunteer hours, whether that's encouraging employee-supported volunteering, programmes which benefit the employer, employee and wider community, as mentioned by Nanette Mill, or through Community Sports Leader Award, which can lead to a national governing body qualification, which can help with experience for UCAS applications for further or higher education, and also provides payback by supporting active school sports clubs and volunteering hours. And from the examples I've seen in Central Scotland, there's a very, very high uptake, particularly of female students, in the Community Sports Leader Award. It's a very, very valuable programme. As well as incentivising volunteering, we have to try and break down the barriers that exist as well. At the last cross-party group in sport, we heard from different organisations that have been having fairly big difficulties in securing disclosure certificates for their volunteers. As soon as one person mentioned a disclosure check, it was like a free-for-all with organisations piling in to tell about how long it's been taking their volunteers to get the certificates, having to wait a long time, possibly putting off people or people being lost to volunteering. While the disclosure checks are essential for working with vulnerable groups, I think the committee and indeed the Minister should look at the performance of Disclosure Scotland and the length of time it's sometimes taken to get certificates to volunteers. As I've said, volunteers must play a massive part in increasing participation, but so must our professional sports clubs. As well as inspiring people to get involved, they should also get involved in local communities. Many football clubs and lower leagues have already adopted and developed the community club models, but the bigger clubs have a contribution to make as well. And I'll give an example from my own area. This summer, Celtic Football Club ran summer sports schools across the west of Scotland and happened to hold a Victor Wanyama skills school in the newly opened Croy Community Sports Hub. The skills school had a great attendance and was an example of how bigger clubs can encourage participation by using their big names or elite athletes to get more people involved, and there's more skill schools planned for the October holidays. I'll close just by congratulating the committee for bringing the debate forward, and also again respectfully ask the Minister whether she would consider bringing forward a debate in the Chamber about the legacy of the successful Olympics and the upcoming Commonwealth Games. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. Minister Shona Robinson, up to 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try and respond to as many of the points as possible. Duncan McNeill, I thought, made some very important points in relation to swimming, which is why we have the top-up swimming programme to address those children who can't swim, particularly from deprived areas, and that's working very well indeed. Active girls, as well as trying to bring together the best of what we know works for teenage girls, but to do it more comprehensively across all schools, and there'll be more information on that shortly. But also GP referral, I agree, and I think we've tried and tested it. We need to now make it happen as far and wide as possible, and again, we're working on that. Patricia Ferguson made a number of important points, but if I could deal with her point that Mark Griffin also made, and that is about a debate. You may be aware, obviously, of the commitment to bring forward a regular debate and update on the Commonwealth Games. I would suggest that would be the place for us to not just reflect, but also to look going forward, and I can certainly promise that before the end of the year. Can I say to Nanette Milne and also Liz Smith, who mentioned about PE teacher numbers, in actual fact, there has been a rise. If you look at the 2005 figures, 1,821. In 2011, it was 2,116. And if you take the overall numbers, including those centrally employed, it's 2,182. I think we have to recognise, though, that the classroom teachers within primary schools have got a very, very important role to play in delivering PE. And what we're working on at the moment is building on the good work of Education Scotland and making sure that they have the skills to deliver quality PE to those children. Kezia Dugdale talked about the Community Ownership and Management Fund, and I can reassure her that detailed work is going on that fund at the moment, with details to be announced soon. I think there's a good opportunity. She talked about the social enterprise work. I will look at the issue of the post that she mentioned, because I've met the lady concerned myself, and I know that there's some good work going on there, so I will look at that. Jenny Mara mentioned a couple of issues relating to the National Performance Centre. Can I say to her, I'm sure there is no one in this chamber who would expect anything other than an open, fair and transparent process when allocating £25 million of public money. And I'm sure that she would acknowledge that. I'm also surprised that she would cast doubt on the very fund that is there to deliver the National Performance Centre. She has been told on a number of occasions that the Young Scot Fund is a £50 million fund, with the majority of it coming in 2015-16. And of course, the budget she refers to is only up to 2014-15. So I hope we'll have no more doubts cast on the money for the National Performance Centre. Alison Johnson mentioned a number of issues relating to cycling. I had a very good meeting with her and the cross-party group on cycling. I hope they will welcome the £6 million of extra money within the budget John Swinney announced earlier on. John Park, again, as always, made a very good contribution. I'm pleased that he said, of course, that the modern apprenticeship framework is that people are quite rightly have employment status. I hope perhaps he'll share that with the rest of his colleagues in terms of some of their responses to the apprenticeship programme. But what I will do is look at the new youth employment initiative that myself and Angela Constance launched in relation to the points that he made, because I thought they had some validity, and we'll take that forward. I want to just end with a little bit more information about the new youth sport strategy that I announced earlier, because there is an opportunity for us to not just harness all of the really good work that's going on, whether that's around PE, active school, community sports hubs, all of that good work, but also for us to look at what more needs to be done. And I hope that we can use the opportunity over the next few months to have a very good look at what works, but looking at preschool right the way through to higher and further education, and how we ensure that we not just get children active at a young age, but keep them active as they go through their formative years and into their teenage years and beyond. Working with key partners, we hope to be in a position to publish our new strategy next spring. With the involvement of the Youth Sport Panel, I think we're going to have a really, really good piece of work, and I look forward to the contributions of the Chamber in that as we take it forward.
I now call Bob Doris. Mr Doris is going to wind up on behalf of the committee. I would be obliged if you would continue until 5 p.m.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to thank all the contributors to this debate for helping inform the Health and Sport Committee inquiry into support for community sport. I can assure you we'll look at all the comments very carefully, and they will help form our final report back to this Parliament. I'll only maybe refer to some of the comments made due to time constraints, but I thought our convener started the tone very well, talking about hard-to-reach groups in relation to sport. Girls were mentioned, a variety of other groups were mentioned, but one group that wasn't mentioned was those with disabilities, and I think given the Paralympics, the very successful Paralympics we've just had, it's important to put that on record and say that the committee will no doubt look at that in some detail. Also, volunteering and the value of volunteering as well as a vital component, a thread that ran through the entire debate. I was particularly interested by Gil Patterson's point that many volunteers are volunteers because their sons and daughters are involved in sport, and when their sons and daughters move on, the volunteers sometimes also move on, and we have to look at strategies to maintain that volunteering. I was delighted that Patricia Ferguson is supporting my campaign to achieve a £2.2 million investment in Pinkston and Glasgow for the Paddle Sports Centre there. Indeed, we had Tim Bailey and Etienne Scott, the gold medalists in the canoeing, in Parliament today, and I met with them to discuss progress, and I know the Sports Minister's taken an active interest in that, so I thank the Parliament for that support. And it makes an interesting balance between elite sports and community sports, which Alison Johnson, I thought, referred to excellently about how you map out the support for elite sports, but at the same time, we're not just cheering them on in person or on television, but we're actually getting involved in sports and physical participation ourselves. I think that's very important. PE was mentioned a lot. I won't rehearse that again, but I would say that PE teachers are important. There's been significant progress there, but sports and physical participation, I apologise to Margaret MacDonald, I just don't have time, but what I would like to say is that sport is a whole school ethos and not just for PE departments, and that's why the Active Schools Network is so important also, and I think that's very, very important. Can I say that one of the aspects of the Health Committee's evidence received so far from witnesses is the desire to get a closer and more integrated relationship between the NHS and sport, and that's been referred to as well, and I should stress that there is much good work going on. However, it's thought that perhaps that can be improved. I'm delighted to see there's a £100,000 investment from the Scottish Government to try and progress that further. I would say to the Minister that one of the issues with the GP referral system at the moment is sometimes there's little or no choice in relation to that. And Dr Cindy Gray, who's a research fellow of the Institute of Health and Wellbeing at Glasgow University, agreed with that, and he said a real valued choice for patients is vital in relation to that. And Dr Gray is actually a vitally important person in relation to how we can justify additional spend in this area, given the fact that she's currently analysing the football fans and training programme supported by the SPL Trust, which actually has SPL football clubs working in partnership with GPs and patients to use the brand of these football clubs to get more people physically active. I think that's something that can be pursued not just in football, but basketball and cricket and rugby and in greater community sports. And we have to roll out that model. But I would say that choice, again, is key. And I would say that the analysis that the Glasgow University is doing is also key, because we have to actually justify the spend of taxpayers' money. So early intervention and getting people physically active rather than suffering ill health is the way to go ahead. But we have to quantify the benefits to that. If I could perhaps finish with a suggestion that I have myself. There was much conversation at committee during the evidence sessions in relation to which sports gained benefit from cashback for communities and which didn't. John Parks mentioned in relation to apprenticeships and the focus on that, and Margaret MacDonald's spoken about that issue. Also, can I suggest that one aspect for proceeds of crime could potentially be to leverage in a weighting to areas with great health inequalities, because if we can put more money into the areas and the groups that suffer from health inequalities, whether it's via GP's practice and community sports, we can make a real difference. So perhaps that's something our committee will look at again. But can I just finish, Presiding Officer, by saying it's been an excellent debate. I know the committee will look in detail at all the suggestions that have been made, and we look forward to reporting back to this Parliament in due course.
That concludes the debate on the Health and Sports Committee. Mr Finlay, I believe you have a point of order.
On a point of order, Presiding Officer, under Standing Order 13.9.1, it says that any member may address a question on any matter concerning the parliamentary corporation or the staff of the Parliament to the Scottish Parliament corporate body. Can I ask if there is a mechanism within Standing Orders to ask emergency questions of the corporate body? This is a pertinent point of order because of a situation that has been going on since last week. I've been informed that people inside and outside of this Parliament have tried several times unsuccessfully to sign petition PE 01452, the People's Charter, and I understand that this is due to a technical problem with the IT system. This is unfortunately not good enough and is undermining the ability of people to engage with this Parliament. Can I ask for your guidance as to how we raise such emergencies with the corporate body, as all avenues so far have failed to resolve this problem?
I thank Mr Findlay for giving me advance notice of his point of order. I am well aware of the ongoing problems with the e-petition system that the member has raised. The matter is under constant review by the corporate body, particularly raised by the Chair of the Public Petitions Committee, David Stewart, who is also a member of the corporate body. So I'm extremely sorry to hear of additional difficulties today. The member has asked, however, about how the very specific issue can be raised with the corporate body as an emergency question. There is no such mechanism. However, if the member wishes to write to me as presiding officer and chair of the corporate body, I will ensure that he gets a speedy reply in the next few days. We now move to decision time. There is one question to be put as a result of today's business. The question is that motion number 4179 in the name of Duncan McNeill on the Health and Sports Committee's inquiry into support for community sport be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. I now close this meeting. It's not what my